Come on, boys. Get after them rabbits, come on. That's it. And you just keep on going.
What's she doing?
Something's wrong.
Gonna crash her then?
No, they'll be all right. Come on.
In here?
Not much choice.
You there! Get off my land! You leave it. You just leave it there. You don't get that back.
Now, look, just a minute. I don't think there's any need...
Get out! Go on, all of you. You see what you've done? You've killed him. You've killed him now, haven't you? I warned you time and again, and now you've done it, haven't you?
I'm sorry, I don't understand.
My bull. He's dead. You frightened him to it, you killed him. Now, get off my land!
Yes, but what about the balloon?
What about it?
Hello.
I just popped in on the off chance, Mrs. Troy. I was lucky to find you in.
Yes, Mrs. Pearson, it was a pity, wasn't it?
Because you've been very good to me, really.
Well, don't thank me, just thank the Legal Aid Service.
But it's been a two-way thing, though, hasn't it? Because I've put a lot of work your way. Not that you've ever actually got me off any charges.
Well, you did make it a bit difficult. You always pleaded guilty.
All the same, lost opportunities.
I don't think crime's your forte, you see. If you want to go shoplifting in Sainsbury's without getting caught, you do not go in carrying an empty suitcase.
I'd only just stolen it out of John Lewis's. If I'd left it outside, somebody might have nicked it. Oh, but you're pleasing mitigation, Mrs. Troy. Works of art they were. The way you went on about my hard life and all my disadvantages, even I started to feel I couldn't help it.
Yes, I noticed.
In fact, I think I was the only female cat burglar around in those days. Pussy Pearson, they used to call me.
Well, I'm sure they had their reasons.
Oh, I've had a wonderful life, really. My Roy says I should write it all down for a book, only I haven't got a typewriter.
You could always go down to Ryman's one night after they closed. Now, Mrs. Pearson, it has been nice to see you again, but if you haven't got anything
Well,
I
I
can do for you...
did just want a little legal advice.
Well, you must see a solicitor. I'm a barrister. If you want to see a barrister, you first see a solicitor, and then, if necessary, he comes to see me on your behalf.
Well, what's the point of that, though? You end up paying two people then instead of one.
It's how it's done.
Seems like a bit of a racket to me. I wonder you don't end up in court.
Mrs. Pearson, I am very busy, or I would be if you weren't here.
Right, well, look, I just wanted to ask, not that I'm considering this at all, but just say a person arranged a mortgage with a building society for a house that didn't really exist. How long would they get if they got caught?
With your record collection of golden oldies, Lily, 18 months to 3 years. Now, if you really do want my advice, it would be to give up this life of crime and to try to get a job.
A job?
Yes, a job. Not do one, get one. Why don't you open a dog kennel?
Well, maybe I'll try that then. Oh, before I go, I must just say, those books you write, The Prickly Peter, my little granddaughter, she loves them. I went and got her the whole collection out of Smith's yesterday.
Arthur, you're wearing sandals.
Yes.
Where have you been? Down at the Magistrates' Court at Sue Me by the Sea?
No, it's my feet. I'm going to this alternative chiropodist. It's a new therapy.
Ah.
And he sold me the sandals as well.
Oh, Mrs. Troy, I've found a barrister to take that other case.
Oh, well, I hope it's someone who knows what they're doing.
Oh, senior member, very experienced. No problems there.
Hello, Philippa. I've got my own brief.
Yes. Well, if people want to know where I am, I've just popped down to the bookshop.
Aren't you due as a divorce at 11?
No, they're reconciled. They're staying together for the sake of the cat.
Pity. I was hoping for big refreshers on that.
Vulture.
By the way, the money you owe me for those sandwiches, she still owes it to me.
Thank you, madam. Good day.
What I don't understand is why they don't sue you.
For what?
Passing off.
What do you mean? There's no similarity at all.
They're W.H. Smith, I'm W.G. Smith. How could there possibly be any confusion?
Oh, my book's selling.
Ticking over?
Can't I have a window display?
Not all year round, Mrs. Troy. I like to give Tolstoy a chance every now and then. Encourage the beginners.
Oh, by the way, have you had any books stolen recently, Bill? Because if so, I think I might know who took them, and I can probably get them back.
I'll do a stock check, thanks. Why? Who would have taken them?
Nice woman in a flowery anorak. Doesn't like doors much, very keen on windows. Probably carrying a large suitcase.
Funnily enough.
And despite its apparent complexity, my lord, this is in fact a very straightforward case of an exemplary open and,
Shutness?
Thank you, Mrs. Troy, and I see no reason why you should detain us here for more than 15 or 20 minutes, my lord.
Cancel all appointments for the rest of the week. Carry on, Mr. Triggs.
My client, Farmer Winchcombe, my lord, is a true son of the soil, who, as your lordship can see, brings to the court today not only the old rural values, but also a genuine whiff of the countryside.
Yes, Mr. Triggs, it hadn't escaped my notice.
A man, my lord, whose very appearance says hearts of oak, gnarled hands of toil.
Barrels of cider.
Mrs. Troy, who spoke?
My Lord, Farmer Winchcombe is plainly visible to us all. I don't actually think we need counsel to give us a guided tour around his gaiters.
Yes, Germaine, Mr. Triggs, Germaine.
My lord, now the essence of the case is this. Mr. Winchcombe's farm has been plagued for some years by the balloons.
Balloons, Mr. Triggs?
Hot air balloons, my lord, around the world in 80 days.
And they'd still lose your luggage, yes?
Mr. Winchcombe's farm is situated in a position where balloons frequently run out of steam.
No danger of that in this court, Mr. Triggs.
Over the years, these balloons have destroyed crops, frightened animals, and destroyed property. This catalogue of irritation, my lord, culminated in the events of September last, when yet again a balloon landed on his property. Only this time it caused his prize Hereford bull, Daisy...
Daisy, Mr. Triggs? Daisy the bull?
Daisy, my lord. It was Farmer Winchcombe's whim to call him thus. He is a great admirer of the country and western singer Mr. Johnny Cash, and his song A Boy Named Sue. Inspired by this, he called his bull Daisy. A boy named Sue, my lord, a bull called Daisy.
I'm more of a Dolly Parton man myself.
As your lordship pleases. In any event, the suddenly descending balloon, my lord, caused poor Daisy to have a seizure and to die of fright. So Mr. Winchcombe retained the defendant's property until such a time as proper compensation can be paid.
And what magnitude of loss are we talking about here, Mr. Triggs?
In the region of £15,000, my lord, plus a further £250,000 in lost stud fees. Daisy was very virile, my lord.
You must have been. Thank you.
My Lord,
Mrs. Troy.
my clients are also claiming in this matter both for the return of their property and compensation for their loss of enjoyment of it. They are keen balloonists who have missed several international competitions. The value of the balloon is placed at £10,000, my Lord.
Thank you, Mrs. Troy. Mr. Triggs?
My lord, I wish to call Farmer Armageddon Wheat Chief Winchcombe to the stand, my lord.
Call Farmer Winchcombe and tell him to wipe his feet.
So, your bull meant a lot to you, Farmer Winchcombe. You doted on him. And just as the good shepherd tended his sheep, so you, the good bullman, tended his bull.
That's right. That's right. He was all I had since the wife died.
Thank you, Mr. Winchcombe. No further questions.
Mr. Winchcombe, you say that you've been plagued by balloons on your farm for some years. Is that correct?
That's right. There was nothing but a pest.
So you wrote to the local ballooning association to complain, did you?
Many times. And the papers?
So what action did the Balloon Club take in response to these letters?
Well, they said they'd stop landing on my property, but they didn't. It was all promises and hot air. There was a conspiracy among them.
Between them, Mr. Winchcombe?
Between two, among three. Surely, Mrs. Troy.
No, not necessarily, my lord. Between is a relationship of individuals. Among is rather more collective.
Well, thank you for coming among us and explaining all that, Mrs. Troy. Perhaps in between your other commitments we could get on with the case.
Very good, my lord. Now, the balloonists who landed on your field that day, Mr. Winchcombe, had they landed on your property before?
No, but I don't see that makes any difference. Even if they'd only done it the once, it was still once too often.
If we may turn to your bull, Mr. Winchcombe, £250,000. Now, isn't this rather a high value to place on the sort of animal that wears its jewellery in its nose?
He was a pedigree. You'd pay that for a racehorse and call it a bargain.
Yes, but what was so special about this bull that made him worth £250,000?
Stud fees.
Stud fees worth £250,000. I would have thought for that sort of money you could have rented a dinosaur.
Some days, in the right mood, he could have done a dinosaur. He could service heifers like a mechanic with a truck. You could hear him mooing for miles. He drove them wild with it.
Is that so, Mr. Winchcombe?
Yes, sir. He could do 4 or 5 a day easy, plus the vet.
The vet also, Mr. Winchcombe. Could you hear him mooing for miles too?
I mean the artificial. The vet had come round with his rubber glove and his apparatus, you know, and give him a hand.
I see. So the bull provided these services and you lived off the income. I don't know what the legal position is on all this, but I always thought it was all artificial these days, Mr. Winchcombe.
Not on my farm, sir. We still like to have a bit of the organic for them as can appreciate the difference.
So, how much would you receive, Mr. Winchcombe, for each service rendered?
50, 100 quid, negotiable.
So, in order to arrive at a figure of £250,000, your bull would have to surface some 5,000 heifers.
About that?
Yes, isn't that rather an excessive estimate, Mr. Winchcombe, or did he have elastic bandages for his knees?
I don't call that excessive. I mean, it isn't as many as Bill Wyman in the 60s.
If I may help, my lord, Bill Wyman is a member of the popular singing group The Rolling Stones, best known for their song, I Can't Get Any Satisfaction.
I can't get no satisfaction, my lord.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that.
You say, Mr. Winchcombe, that the balloon was responsible for Daisy's demise in that it frightened him to death. Now, isn't this a bit incredible? That a mere balloon could frighten a bull weighing, what, half a ton to death? It sounds like quite a big load of bull to me.
Size don't enter into it. It's sensitivity what matters. Pedigree bulls are like concert pianists. Highly strung and easily dispirited. He must have seen that great thing falling at him out of the sky and it terrorised him. I mean, he was alive before it landed.
Yes, but how do you know that it was the descent of the balloon that actually killed him, Mr. Winchcombe? Was a post-mortem performed on the bull?
I called the vet round, yeah, for a second opinion, but he confirmed what I thought.
And what was that?
That he was dead. Then he cut him open and had a look.
Yes, and what did that show?
That he was definitely dead. He was dead certain.
He was dead certain of what, Mr. Winchcombe?
Eh? He wasn't certain of anything. He was dead.
And what of the vet, Mr. Winchcombe? Was he certain that the bull was certainly dead, or were neither of them too sure about anything?
You've got the report there, haven't you?
Yes, it's rather inconclusive. It doesn't say anything about balloons as a cause of death anywhere. I don't think I've ever heard of a medical condition called frightened by a balloon.
Well, it seems a bit of a coincidence to me. I mean, if it wasn't the balloon what killed him, what did? I mean, I don't think it was because the rope snapped when he was out one day bungee jumping.
Then perhaps he fell off his dinosaur. Thank you, Mr. Winchcombe.
Well, it seems that lunchtime has crept up on us again. Any here looking for good rustic fare, I can heartily recommend the ploughman's platter and a half pint of old Stebbins down at the Dog and Pheasant.
Call old Stebbins.
Adjourn till 2.
What will I?
Rent a turnip over there. He's lying about something.
Well, it's hard to get through the day without doing that, Mrs. Troy, especially in our job. Well, yours.
I'll see you after lunch.
And I've got an appointment for my feet.
Arthur, have you ever thought that your feet could be all in your mind? Why don't you stick a corn pad on your head? It might do the trick.
Mrs. Troy, do you think I could have a word?
Oh, don't worry, Mr. Drew. It's all going splendidly.
But I just wondered if you could sign this Prickly Peter book for my son. 'Tis you who writes them, isn't it?
Oh, yes, of course. What's his name?
He's called Peter.
Is he really? What a lovely name.
Did you try a half pint of old Stebbins, as I suggested, Mr. Winchcombe?
Manure for the mind, my lord. Manure for the mind, best spread on thick.
Good, good. I thought you'd enjoy it. Mrs. Troy.
Oh, I'd like to call Miss Dorothy Harvey, my lord.
Call Mrs. Dittisham Burby.
Dorothy Harvey.
Yeah, call the next witness.
Miss Harvey, are you an experienced balloonist?
Yes, I am.
And how long have you held a balloonist license?
5 years.
Are balloons safe, Miss Harvey?
Yeah, very. The most dangerous part of ballooning is driving home again afterwards.
You cannot, however, control the direction of a balloon. You fly with the wind.
Well, that's right, but you can control the altitude.
And on the day when you landed in Mr. Winchcombe's field, did you know where you were?
Well, I knew we were over his farm, but I knew not to land there.
You did, nevertheless?
Well, I had no choice. The balloon began to lose altitude.
Why do you think that was?
Various reasons. It could have been the ambient air temperature, or there could have been some problem with the fabric.
For example?
Don't really know. A tear in the material, maybe. Some stitching.
And were you aware of Mr. Winchcombe's dearly beloved Daisy writing his obituary in the field below as you descended?
No. My chief concern was for the balloon and my passenger. And the next thing we knew, Mr. Winchcombe was there shouting at us and saying we killed something and waving his gun at us.
A gun? Mr. Winchcombe had a gun with him?
Well, we heard some shots as we were flying over.
Thank you, Miss Harvey. No further questions.
Now, Miss Harvey, is it not true that the balloon landed where it did because of your failure to control it properly?
No, certainly not.
No, because you say you're an experienced balloon pilot. But am I not right in thinking there are some interpretations of the Bible that imply that a woman in a balloon is an abomination?
I thought that was trousers, Mr. Triggs.
That too, my lord.
Thought we were going to finish it today.
Me too. Did you find that old brief I asked you for?
Yep. Lily Pearson.
It's one of several dozen that have been through here over the years.
Well, this one's for shoplifting. Stealing 8 plastic Christmas trees from B&Q. She said she was doing it for the homeless.
That's her. See if you've got her home telephone number, would you?
Sure. Susan, I've got your sandwiches.
Oh, you are a sweetie pie. Can I pay you next week?
Who'd ever have thought it, eh, Mrs. Troy? You and me in the moonlight in Lover's Lane.
He's gone to bed at last.
I used to come here with my husband when I was courting.
So did I.
Then I used to come here with Maisie Ryan's husband as well sometimes.
Yes, you are. Right, you're ready. Finished your tea. There's the torch. You know what to do.
I get into the barn.
Yes, you go in, and when you get in there, you should find a balloon.
What, like with Happy Birthday written on it?
No, a big balloon. Up and away, you know.
Oh, right.
You take the torch and the camera and see if you can find any holes in the fabric.
Holes?
Yes, like bullet holes, lead shot.
Bullet holes?
Yes. If you find any, you take a photograph and then you come back.
Well, it doesn't sound too difficult.
Simple.
So why can't you do it then?
Lily, we have been through this. I am a barrister. If I get caught trespassing, it could reflect very badly on me. It could end my career.
Well, what about my career?
Documentary is your career.
Oh, yeah. I thought you wanted me to give it all up and open a dog kennel.
Give it up tomorrow. The dogs will still be there. And this isn't criminal. It's just a little bit of trespass, that's all.
Well, OK, I suppose.
Right. Justice is at stake here, Lily.
Right. For justice then, Mrs. Troy. I'll do it for justice. But I'll only do it justice once.
We're waiting.
Won't be long.
Oh, and Lily, don't take anything, just the photograph. Prickly Peter the Hedgehog sat wrapped up in his overcoat, sipping slowly at a cup of hot acorn cocoa. When suddenly there came a quiet tap at the door. How'd you get on?
I got it, Mrs. Troy.
Well done. What's that smell?
It's my fault. I stood in something. Orthopedic stockings too. I have to get them on prescription.
Well, were they there, the holes in the balloon?
Yeah, just like you said. Full of little holes it was, up at the top.
Good. I'll just get my solicitor to pay a quick visit to the old folks' home in the morning.
Why, thinking of retiring, is he?
Really?
Yes.
It was just the photograph you took, wasn't it?
Yes, of course.
Oh, Lily.
It's only a little one. I thought I could open a hen kennel.
Mr. Winchcombe, you're still under oath. If standing gets too much for you, let us know.
Thank you, sir.
Mrs. Troy.
My lord. Mr. Winchcombe.
Yes?
Daisy the Bull, of whose prowess and virility we have heard so much, is it not true to say that in the weeks before his death, his star was no longer in the ascendant?
I don't know what you mean.
I mean, he was no longer as active as he had been on the organic side.
Well, I wouldn't say that, though we all have our ups and downs.
Oh, but Daisy was mostly just having his downs, wasn't he? His downs and a lot of headaches.
Well, he might not have been so interested as he had been in, like, getting his oof over, no.
And did you consult the vet on this matter, Mr. Winchcombe? Mr. Joshua Adams, now retired?
Yes, I might have asked him to call.
And didn't you ask him if he couldn't give Daisy a little something for his trouble? In fact, did you not ask the vet whether you should show Daisy pictures of cows in farming magazines to whet his fading appetite?
I don't remember what was said exactly.
Didn't you also confide in him that as well as losing interest in his heifers, Daisy was now starting to take some kind of interest in other bulls?
Not at all. He was as straight as a furrow. He never gave him a backward glance.
And after an examination, didn't Mr. Adams tell you that Daisy was suffering from a heart condition and quite likely to die at any time if these demands on him were maintained?
I don't rightly remember.
Isn't it also true, Mr. Winchcombe, that Daisy was already dead hours before Miss Harvey's balloon came anywhere near your property?
No, he was alive and mooing.
And is that what Mr. Adams thought?
Who cares what he thought? He's an old man. His memory's going. He's probably got bovine spongiform. We all know where he's had his arm.
Mr. Winchcombe, when Miss Harvey landed on your property, she said you were carrying a shotgun and that you heard several shots, some of them quite close by. What were you shooting at?
Rabbits. I've been plagued by so many of them, they was holding Bugs Bunny look-alike competitions.
Rabbits, Mr. Winchcombe? Or balloons?
I don't know what you're getting at.
I am getting at these photographs of Miss Harvey's balloon, the holes in the fabric. How do you think they got there?
I don't know.
Isn't the truth of the matter, Mr. Winchcombe, that Daisy the Wonder Bull died in the morning, not the afternoon, died from the excessive demands you had made on him in your search for quick and easy profits?
No.
And seeing your livelihood slip from your grasp, you despaired and you wondered what to do. Until you saw Miss Harvey's balloon approaching and you realized that here was someone you could blame for everything and sue for compensation. And having asked balloons not to land on your property, you now did everything to ensure that they did just that with a shotgun. Is that not correct, Mr. Winchcombe?
No, there's not a word of truth in it. It's all compost of lies.
Don't lean on the witness stand, please, Mr. Winchcombe. Stand up straight when you address this court.
He was lucky he wasn't put away. You could have killed them with that gun.
Yes, I was expecting to hear the throwing away of keys at any second.
Goodbye. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Goodbye.
By the way, Mrs. Troy, how did you get hold of those photographs?
A little bird snapped them for me. Are you missing any books, Bill?
I was, but they came back, actually, Mrs. Troy.
Oh, good. You will keep my display tidy, won't you?
Yes, they were wrapped up in a parcel waiting outside the shop this morning.
Oh, I'll take these, please. See what the opposition's up to.
Funny thing was,
What?
they were covered in chicken feathers.
Really? Whatever has Prickly Peter been up to now? Put these on my account, would you?
Your lunch, Mrs. Troy.
Oh, thank you, Stephen. Put it there.
Prawn and crab sticks with iceberg lettuce.
Good.
Tuna mayonnaise with sweet corn.
Thank you.
Egg and tomato with coleslaw. And carrot cake with yoghurt topping.
Fine, I'll pay you next week.
Next week.
Hang on, no flapjacks?
Oh, no, they didn't have any today.
Oh, I suppose I just have to go hungry then.
Yes. Looks familiar, Mrs. Troy.
It should do. There's probably one on every mantelpiece between here and John O'Groats.
Oh, yes. We used to have a big poster of it once on our sitting room wall.
Did you? We used to cover our damp patch with a mirror.
I think it's lovely.
Do you? It's a bit twee for me, all big eyes and Bambi. Could put you off your lunch.
What was it called again? What a Charmer.
No, you're thinking of What a Scorcher. That's called Whose Little Girl Are You?
That's it. And the photographer was that famous fellow, Fortnum.
Mason.
That's right, yes. It must be quite an old photograph now. How many years has it been about?
Oh, 30 years or so. Mason's being sued over it.
Over the photograph? Of a baby? Who's suing him?
The baby.
Of course, she's not a baby anymore, Mrs. Troy.
No, well, you'd expect some change in her appearance after 30 years. It'd be a shame if she was still sucking her pram, sucking her big toe.
Very good of you to come to the studio, Mrs. Troy. There's not a lot of barristers who would stir from their chambers to visit a client.
When you share your chambers with the sort of waxworks I do, Arthur, you're glad to get out of the place. Besides, when I get a lion for a client, I like to beard him in his den.
Yes, over there. A bit of an arrogant lot, some of them in your chambers, Mrs. Troy, if you don't mind me saying.
Oh, do you think so?
Yes, I mean, we solicitors are a pretty modest lot by comparison. But a lot of barristers seem to have this sort of attitude as though, I don't know, they're doing a favour just by talking to you.
Well, we usually are, aren't we? People pay for my opinions. You'd have a hard job giving yours away. Although you're right. There is an arrogant element in the profession. It reflects very badly on the rest of us.
Yes, quite.
Well, get on with it, Arthur. Ring the bell. You're sure you're not expecting me to do it?
Oh, yes, I'm sorry.
It's like a hit record, Mrs. Troy. Where there's a hit, there's a writ. Sugar?
No, thank you. It was a writ a long time a-coming, then.
Yeah, well, it takes some insects a long while to crawl out the woodwork.
Have you ever been sued before, Mr. Mason?
Not for this, no. No, I've been taken to the cleaners for alimony often enough. It seems to me that the divorce court should call itself sketchless.
These are very good.
Yeah, 4 a.m. On the soup run. See how the other half lives.
In acute discomfort, by the look of it. Have you seen these faces, Arthur?
Yes, they certainly look lived in.
It looks as though they've been parked on to me.
No, I hate anything posed, you know. Snap, get the moment, real life. Not a load of rubbish like Whose Little Girl Are You?
No, I wouldn't call it rubbish.
You'd bin it, though, wouldn't you, Mrs. Troy?
It's not quite my cup of tea.
No, but it's my bread and butter. Do you know 20 million copies of that sold worldwide? I get 10 pence a copy. Snap a kid in the park one afternoon and it's your pension.
This is a straightforward and very simple case, my lord. A case as black as it is white, as tall as it is long, as narrow as it is wide, and indeed as open as it is...
Shut. You said that about the fraudulent dealing, Mr. Triggs. We didn't go home for 17 weeks. Proceed to the point, then.
If counsel needs any assistance in that direction, my lord, I'll be happy to provide him with a map reference.
The plaintiff, Miss Kathleen Jerome, was at the time the wrong was committed and her rights infringed.
Alleged wrongs, my lord, and alleged rights. Two allegations do not amount to an infringement.
Mrs. Troy, could you possibly spare us these continuous interruptions?
So, with respect, my lord, I think your lordship means continual interruptions. Continuous comes to an end. Continual goes on relentlessly.
Then continual it plainly is, Mrs. Troy. Continue, Mr. Triggs.
At the time the disputed photograph was taken, my lord, she was then naught but a babe in arms.
I thought the baby was in a pram, Mr. Triggs.
Yes, she was naught but a babe in arms in a pram, my lord.
Was somebody carrying the pram? Where was that? Had the wheels fallen off?
I was speaking figuratively, my lord.
I listen literally, Mr. Triggs.
I merely wish to convey her almost biblical innocence as she lay, like Moses, in his Moses basket. For is it not, as the Gospels say, suffer the little children to come unto me?
It is us who appear to be doing the suffering now, Mr. Triggs.
We, my lord.
Yes, indeed.
So, Miss Jerome was but a babe in arms, my lord, in a pram on a warm day in June, in a sun hat to ward off the sun, when her photograph was taken by the defendant and then ruthlessly exploited for every penny it was worth. And many a penny it was worth, my lord, and yet not one penny apiece of all those many a pennies has ever found its way to the plaintiff, though they have long lined the pockets of the defendant. In fact, if I may quote, my lord, somewhat aptly from St. Paul's epistle to the Corinthians, when I was a child, I spake as a child.
Yes, only you're a barrister now, Mr. Triggs. Can we get on with the case?
Yes, well, I'd like to call Miss Kathleen Jerome this time, my lord.
Miss Kathleen Jerome. Speak up, man. I can hardly hear you.
Sorry, touch of laryngitis.
He's getting too old for this, you know.
I'm not just
And finally, how long have you known, Miss Jerome, that you were that little girl in the photograph?
Almost ever since I can remember.
Thank you. Mrs. Troy, you have some pertinent inquiries?
I do, my lord.
Inquire pertinently away, then.
Miss Jerome, you have always known that you were the girl in the photograph. How long exactly is always?
Since I was 4 or 5.
Oh, and presumably you have some good grounds for believing this. I assume your own recollection as an 8-month-old would be somewhat hazy.
Yes, but my mother always said that it was me and she kept a copy of the photograph. It appeared in a newspaper a few days after it was taken.
Oh, so your mother was with you in the park that day, at the business end of the pram?
No, not her. I was taken there by my nanny.
Your nanny, Miss Jerome? Yes, indeed. I had a nanny myself once. And even now, I still can't put my... Carry on, Mrs. Troy.
May I ask how old you are, Miss Jerome?
How old, Mrs. Troy? That is hardly a gentlemanly question.
Ah, but for a mere woman to have the presumption to ask a gentlemanly question in court, my lord, would scarcely be ladylike.
Miss Jerome?
I'm 35.
Oh. So, for some 30-something years, you have always known that you were the girl in the photograph, and yet you have only now seen fit to make any kind of claim. Why did you not initiate proceedings before? Why the long hiatus, Miss Jerome?
I rather naively didn't realise that Mr. Mason was making so much money out of it in royalties.
Ah, and you thought you might like to have a share of those royalties, that there was room for another bucket in the well, another hand in the till.
Another leg in the bed, Mrs. Troy.
As your lordship pleases. Miss Jerome?
I certainly felt it was unjust that he was making so much money out of me when I didn't receive a penny myself.
And did you write to Mr. Mason to this effect?
Yes, but he sent back what was obviously a standard letter, implying that he received a lot of claims of this nature from people trying to cash in on his success, and it wasn't his policy to entertain them.
And isn't that precisely what you are trying to do, Miss Jerome? To take a jump from a standing start onto somebody else's bandwagon?
Certainly not. I just want what's fairly mine. A share in the profits of the exploitation of my own image.
If it is your image, of course, Miss Jerome.
Well, that's what we're here to establish, I think.
And from what we have heard so far, it must surely still wait to be established. Thank you, Miss Jerome. No further questions.
Mr. Triggs, your next witness.
I wish to call Nanny Rachel Evans, my lord.
No, not Nanny Welshaw.
Rachel, my lord.
Oh, yes. Yes. It's all right. A ghost has just tiptoed over my grave. That's right.
Call Miss Nanny Rachel.
And nothing but the truth. You should gargle with some TCP for that.
Now, Mrs. Evans, I'd like
Nanny.
I'm sorry?
I prefer to be addressed by my professional title, Nanny Rachel, not Mrs. Evans.
Yes, I can quite understand that. Now, Mrs. Evans,
Nanny. Nanny Rachel.
I think Nanny knows best, Mr. Trevor. She always does.
Nanny it is, my lord. Now then, Nanny Rachel, I'm sure that you must be very familiar with St. Paul's epistle to the Corinthians.
No, I'm sorry, sir. I have always made it my rule never to open another person's correspondence. If it's not addressed to me, I don't open it.
Then let us just pass over that matter. Let me ask you to cast your mind back some 30-something years. Can you remember what you were doing at the time?
Yes, I was a nanny. I've always been a nanny.
And to paraphrase the title of the photograph, whose little nanny were you?
Are you being impertinent, young man? In my day, a good smack cured more than bedwetting.
No. Let me rephrase the question. Can you remember in whose employment you were at the time, Nanny Rachel?
Certainly. Miss Jerome's mother employed me to look after her. Miss Jerome's mother was a professional woman who had recently divorced her husband, which was still quite a scandal in those days. But I was kind enough to overlook it, and she seemed to have good references, so I took her on and looked after little Catherine.
I see. Now, can you cast your mind back to that summer of...
1958.
The summer of 1958, when the date would be
June the 19th.
Indeed, June the 19th. And can you tell us what happened on that day?
Yes, of course, that's why I'm here. I took little Kathleen. Oh, she was a lovely baby. It's a shame she never married. But she would put her elbows on the table. I took her into the park. In her pram, as I usually did when it was fine.
The pram we see in the photograph?
Yes, Silver Cross. Very good prams. I wouldn't push anything else.
And was Kathleen wearing a sun hat at the time?
Of course she was. It was hot. Stupid question.
Perhaps you'd like to tell us what happened then, Nanny Rachel, in your own words.
Well, they're bound to be my own words, aren't they? Who else's words would I use? I'm not a parrot.
Let's just sit down and listen, Mr. Triggs, and let it all wash over us, shall we?
Well, Mrs. Jerome had given me her camera, Brownie Kodak, if I remember. Very good cameras. I only ever worked for families with Brownie Kodaks. And she asked me to take a picture of Kathleen in her pram. And I was just doing so when I was approached by a man.
A man?
Yes, a man. We had them then. Not And I was about to give him short shrift because you were always being approached by men in the park, especially in uniform.
Men in uniform?
No, I was in uniform. Very from damages. But he seemed politely spoken and asked if he could take a photo of Kathleen as he was trying to take some summer shots that he could sell to the papers. Well, I couldn't see any harm in it. So he took the photograph and it first appeared a few days after in one of the dailies.
Of Kathleen?
Yes. And after that, it just sort of snowballed, and soon you were seeing it everywhere.
And do you see the man who took the photograph in court today? Was that man Mr. Mason?
I don't know.
You don't know?
Not with certainty, no. People change over the years. It might be him, but I'm not positive. And I'm here to tell the truth as I know it, and not to perjure myself for your convenience, even if you did pay for the taxi.
Indeed not, Nanny Rachel, nor would we wish you to. But irrespective of who took the photograph, you do believe it to be of Kathleen taken on that day?
Yes. To the best of my knowledge, that's Kathleen, yes.
Thank you. No further questions.
Mrs. Troy, your nanny.
Nanny Rachel.
Yes?
I am Barrister Philippa.
We all know who you are, Mrs. Troy. Why is another question.
Now, Nanny Rachel, you've been a nanny all your working life, haven't you?
Yes, about 40 years. Except for the time I took off to have my own family.
Who you brought up yourself, I presume.
No, I employed a nanny so I could go on with my nannying work. These things are best left to the professionals. I wouldn't have been happy just bringing up children.
Now, in the light of your professional experience, would you not say that, unique as they are to their mothers, in many ways, one baby in a sun hat is much like another?
Some might think so.
And isn't one pram much like another, and one park much like another, and one sunny day much like another? And doesn't memory play tricks on us all, Nanny Rachel?
Not on me, it doesn't.
No, it wouldn't dare. Thank you. No further questions.
Thank you, Mrs. Troy. Now, as we're teetering on the verge of luncheon anyway, let's resume at 2. Now, if anyone in court is at all fond of Eastern food, may I suggest the new Singapore lunch counter across the street, where the Raffles burger and noodles and the Sadie Thompson pudding are highly recommended. Court adjourned.
Court will rise.
You see, in a criminal case, the defendant's guilt must be proven beyond reasonable doubt. But in a civil case like this one, the burden of proof is not so arduous and is decided on the balance of probability.
Believe you me, Mrs. Troy, there's no way the baby in that photograph is Kathleen Jerome. It's a physical impossibility.
If you say so, Mr. Mason, but why are you so sure?
I'm sure, Mrs. Troy, because I'm sure.
Fine. Only if you won't cooperate, how do I convince Judge Wallace? Any suggestions?
No,
Would you like to settle?
not for what she's asking.
Well, if I could get them to compromise.
If compromise is another word for cheap, yeah.
It may be. My client may be prepared to settle, actually, Gerald.
Might he? Mm-hmm.
If the terms were right, would yours?
She might do if the terms were favourable.
Oh, would she?
How much did he have in mind?
Why, what was she thinking of?
Well, in terms of a general estimate...
Just to take a ballpark figure.
Roughly speaking...
In the region of...
No, that's grossly inadequate.
No, I'm afraid that's far too much. Unless you have any room for manoeuvre there.
If you have any latitude...
Well, I could maybe go up to...
I could maybe come down to...
Yes?
Yes. No. Any luck?
No. There's something Mason isn't telling us, Arthur. If you ask me, he'd sooner lose the case than say what it is.
Yes. I think I'm getting hemorrhoids, you know, Mrs. Troy.
Oh, good. Well, we'll be able to cite them in evidence, won't we?
Pardon?
Look, there is nothing wrong with you, Arthur. It is all in your mind.
Well, it doesn't feel like it, especially when I sit down. My wife got me some things from a chemist for it, but they taste absolutely dreadful. Are you going to put Mason in the stand?
No, he'd be useless. I must get an adjournment.
No, I'm sorry, Mrs. Troy. I can't quite hear what you've been saying.
I was about to call a witness, my lord.
Speak up, Mrs. Troy. Have you picked up this bug that seems to be going around? Is that it?
You may be right, my lord. It could be the bug.
Is that what you're trying to tell us?
Yes, my lord. I think I might be losing my voice. My voice, my lord.
Oh, well, in that case, we'd better adjourn the court until tomorrow, when presumably you'll have recovered. And next time you lose your voice, Mrs. Troy, don't be afraid to speak up about it. Court adjourned.
Court adjourned.
Night, Philippa.
Night, Harold.
Burning the midnight oil?
Scraping the midnight barrel.
Oh, dear. Well, they'll be closed shortly. I'm just popping over to Wagstaff's.
Oh, Harold, you're a bit of an amateur snapper, aren't you? Do you know this?
Yes. Whose little girl are you? Mason took it, didn't he? School of Realism.
What does that mean exactly?
Oh, you know, naturalism. Capturing the spontaneous moment. Hiding behind a lamppost with a camera for 6 months, waiting for the right pair of legs to walk by. Yes, he built his whole reputation on it.
So he wouldn't use models?
Oh, no, nothing posed. He scorns all that. It's all pure spur-of-the-moment stuff. Why?
I just wondered how important it was.
Very, if you've built your whole reputation on it. Anyway, I must dash. I'll see you in the morning. Don't forget to go home.
No. Yes. Oh, yes. Oh, hello, Arthur. Sorry to bother you on your mobile. You're sitting on the what? Oh, the train. Yes, look, I know Mason had a lot of wives. Did he ever have any children? Oh, just a son. Well, see if you can get hold of him anyway, will you? Yeah, fine. Bye. Prickly Peter packs a bag. New paragraph. It's going to be a long night, Prickly Peter said, but then that's all part of being a hedgehog. Can I stop you? Oh, no, let me pick it up.
Thank you.
Here you are.
Thank you.
Not at all.
It's Mrs. Troy, isn't it?
Yes.
It's about this case you've been doing, Kathleen Jerome. I've been following it in the papers.
Yes.
It's something I think you ought to know.
Why? Who are you?
Well, I'm her father.
And that concludes the watertight case for the plaintiff, my lord.
Thank you, Miss Triggs, and a very well presented and cogently argued case it was. I particularly appreciated St. Paul's letter to the Hebrews, quoted in all its entirety. Mrs. Troy, you have any passing remarks of some small consequence, do you, to pad out the defence?
No, my lord, but I would like to call Mr. Albert Harrison.
Call Mr. Herbert Bannister. Fully recovered, are we, Mr. Stanley?
Who's this Harrison?
Don't worry, Mr. Mason. Mrs. Troy's going to win the case for you.
Yes, that's what's beginning to worry me.
Mr. Harrison. Mr. Albert Harrison. Is that correct?
Albert Percival Harrison in full, ma'am. That's right, yes.
Have you ever been married, Mr. Harrison?
Yes, twice. Divorced once, widowed once.
Any children?
A daughter from my first marriage and 2 sons.
And what was your daughter's name, Mr. Harrison?
Kathleen.
Kathleen.
Yes, though she took her mother's surname, Kathleen Jerome.
Dad? Dad, is it really you?
Hello, Kathy.
Dad?
Order. I will not have such consummation. This is a court of law, not a missing persons bureau. Now, is this man your father, Miss Jerome?
Yes, my lord. I believe he is.
Ah, well, yes. Most touching, yes. Father and daughter reunion. I seem to have something in my eye, Mrs. Troy. Could carry on.
When was the last time you saw Kathleen, Mr. Harrison?
Oh, long ago, when she was still a baby. Her mother and I divorced, and I was going away to start afresh. So I went to the house the day before I left to see Kathy one last time and hoping to take a photograph so that I'd have something of her. But she wasn't there, so I walked around till I found her in the park with her nanny Rachel. Well, I knew she wouldn't let me near her if she knew who I was, so I pretended to be a reporter so she'd let me take Kathy's photograph, which she did. And when the nanny wasn't looking, I kissed little Kathleen goodbye. And the next day I left and we lost touch. But I still have that photograph. It's rather faded now, very like the other one, but you can see when you compare them, Catherine was the lovelier baby.
Thank you, Mr. Harrison. No further questions.
Mr. Trigg? Mr. Harrison, if you are the man who photographed Kathleen, and if Kathleen is not the baby in the Whose Little Girl Are You picture taken by Mr. Mason, then who is?
Maybe you better ask him.
Mrs. Troy, do you intend to call Mr. Mason?
I do, my lord. Mr. Justin Mason, that is.
Justin? What's he doing here?
Call
I don't want him called.
Too late. Mr. Mason, do you recognise this photograph?
Yes, it's a very well-known one called Whose Little Girl Are You?
And do you know who this little girl in the photograph is, Mr. Mason?
Yes, it's me.
It's you, Mr. Mason?
Yes, my lord.
Well, presumably you haven't had some kind of radical surgical appendage attachment since the photograph was taken. Are we to presume, then, that Whose Little Girl Are You is, in fact, a little boy?
That's correct, my lord.
Perhaps you'd care to enlarge on that, Mr. Mason.
Well, John Mason, the defendant, is my father. He was a young and struggling photographer at the time and needed to make some money. And the newspapers were always looking for the right kind of photograph. So he and my mother took me to the park, took a lot of photographs, apparently, but they didn't work.
They didn't work in what way?
They weren't cute enough, I suppose, for what he was aiming at.
But I thought your father didn't aim at anything. I thought he just shot life as it happened.
Yes, I think that's probably why we're all here.
And so?
Well, so Dad decided that things might work out better if I was a little girl. I had blonde hair as a baby. So he sent Mum off to buy me a pink sun hat, bought me an ice cream, took the photograph, and the rest I think you know about. That was the result. Whose little girl are you?
And none of you ever told anyone?
I didn't. It was all a bit embarrassing.
Your mother never told anyone?
No. Sales of that photograph were paying her alimony. She wasn't about to throttle the goose while the golden eggs were still coming out of it.
It would have saved a good deal of time, trouble, expense and inconvenience, Mrs. Troy, if your client had told us all this before.
I think he had his reasons, my lord, for keeping his own counsel.
Keeping her in what, Mrs. Troy? Continuous employment?
Continual, I hope, my lord. Mr. Mason has a considerable artistic reputation which may possibly be compromised by these revelations.
Yes, I see. Well, it's obviously pointless for the case to proceed. Case dismissed, no order for costs. And quite frankly, I'm glad to see the back of this one. And I, for one, won't be ordering any enlargements.
Oh, come on, Dad. Yeah, and I'll be doing stewed rabbit for doggy commercials. It's a pity when you got your button-down shirts, Justin, you didn't get yourself a button-down lip as well.
Everything all right, Mr. Mason?
Well, I suppose I ought to thank you, Mrs. Troy, but it might have been cheaper in the long run if we'd lost. Send the bill over, will you?
Don't worry, Mr. Mason, I'll get it off to you this afternoon.
Come on, Justin, I'll buy you a drink.
There's gratitude for you.
I thought you did very well there, Mrs. Troy. A few well-placed shots.
Thank you, Arthur, for collecting the ammunition. How's your complaint?
I'm trying homeopathy for it now.
Oh, good. Just as long as you don't try acupuncture.
There she goes. Find a father, lose a case.
Find a son, lose a reputation.
The law giveth, the law taketh away.
Yes, but mostly, Susan, the law just cocketh up.
Busy, Philippa?
Yes, Harold. I've got a nice little murder on the boil, thank you.
It's all right for some.
Why? What are you supposed to be doing?
Boring fraud case. 9 boxes of evidence. Blokes with trusses bringing it in. The jury won't understand it and the judge will fall asleep. No, you're much better off with a murder. There's a bit more life in it.
Well, it's only an attempted murder, really. They didn't get as far as the corpse, just hands round the throat. You know the feeling?
Oh, man and wife, eh? Yes, well, there you are. Marriage guidance doesn't work for everyone.
No, uncle and nephew, actually. Only the nephew didn't quite manage to finish the job.
Why, is he in the building trade?
Car rentals.
Yes, caught in the act, eh? What's his defence?
He was walking in his sleep, my lad, it says there.
No, dodgy defence, that, sleepwalking. I can remember I had a case like that once, a few years ago. Yes, the Crown versus Harris.
Oh, I'll look it up.
This woman claimed to have killed her husband during the course of a nightmare. She choked him with a hot water bottle. She said in court that she dreamt she was stuffing a turkey.
Wrong end, surely. Or was it nouvelle cuisine?
The jury rather gallantly brought in a verdict of not guilty.
Oh, good.
But insane.
Not good.
So she's still inside now, 20 years later. Of course, if they'd found her sane but guilty, she'd have been out years ago. I just thought you'd like to know that. Can I have a flower?
Yes, you may have a flower, Harold. Yes, the trouble is, though, Mr. Goff, the defence you're putting up in legal terms is called automatism. That is an act done without any control of the mind.
A sort of involuntary action, Mr. Goff, a bit like tapping your knee with a hammer, if you do that at all.
Yes. Unfortunately, this defence rarely, if ever, succeeds, for the good reason that if it did, it would licence any crime you care to mention.
Why should I try and kill him? I've no grudge against him. He's my favourite uncle.
How many uncles have you got?
Well, just the one.
Arthur, could you hold your medical examinations at some other time, if you don't mind? Now, your uncle's will, Mr. Goff, an estate of over £250,000 and you the sole beneficiary.
But he never even told me he'd made a will.
He told the Crown Prosecution Service. If we're going to build a case for the defence, we need a reason why you should have walked in your sleep. Now, I don't want to put words into your mouth, but did you, for example, say, fall off your bicycle as a child once, maybe, and fracture your skull?
Me? No, never.
Or maybe you knocked your head on the side of a swimming pool and were concussed?
Me? No, not swimming.
Well, you must have hit your head at some point during your life, Mr. Goff, if only against the wall in frustration.
Oh, right, with you. Something did happen, actually, I was going to mention. On the afternoon of that Saturday, I played rugby, and during the match, I was injured. Kicked in the head. So maybe I could have had some kind of blackout or something.
Kicked in the head. Yes, that could be very useful. Yes, that was lucky, wasn't it, Arthur?
Oh, yes, yes, yes. Very lucky indeed. You're a very lucky young man. There aren't many young men in your situation who've had the good fortune of having their heads kicked. Excuse me, a touch of sinus.
Will he last the case?
Nothing the matter with him. Fittest man in the legal profession. Aren't you, Arthur? So, what have you got now?
Farmer's lung, Mrs. Troy. I should never have bought that strimmer.
You haven't got farmer's lung, Arthur. It's just wind. Now, look, this case. The prosecution are bound to produce expert medical evidence to show that Goff couldn't possibly have walked in his sleep.
Yes, more than likely.
So, we'd better produce our expert medical evidence to show that he did.
Can we assume we'll get it, though? And our expert might agree with the prosecution.
Then make sure you get one who doesn't. Shop around. Find someone who's biased in our favour.
Yes, all right, as you say, Mrs. Troy.
Oh, and don't get a doctor who's been struck off for malpractice again. Try and find one who doesn't interfere with his patients this time.
I shall try, but it's not easy to find.
And then try and find a witness from that rugby match who may have seen Goff get kicked in the head. Get one of your men in grubby raincoats onto it.
No, I don't think the senior partners will want to get involved, Mrs. Troy.
Get Staunchley or whatever his name is. Do you think he did it, Arthur?
I always think they did it, Mrs. Troy. That's why I'm not a barrister. I couldn't stand up and defend a person I thought was guilty.
It's all right for me to do it, though.
Oh, yes, it's all right for you to do it, Mrs. Troy. Yes.
Farmer's lung.
Mr. Amster, may I begin by asking, are you a regular church attender?
Beg pardon?
My lord, my learned friend has only been on his hind legs for 10 seconds and he's handing out his pamphlets. I've heard of Jehovah's Witnesses, my lord, but never Jehovah's barristers.
Yes, Mr. Triggs, must we open every examination by establishing church-going credentials? And would you make your objections a little less objectionable, Mrs. Troy? Troy we may be, Helen of Troy we are not.
Boring old fart.
Continue, Mr. Triggs.
My lord. Now, Mr. Anstey, how long have you been a lodger in the house?
Since early January last year.
Ah, yes, since Epiphany.
Or the winter sales.
Sorry, Mrs. Troy.
Touch of sinus, my lord.
Now, you returned to the house unexpectedly on the night in question. Why was that?
I had gone for a weekend's windsurfing, but the weather turned bad, so I came back early.
And did Mr. Goff know you'd gone away for the weekend?
Yeah, I go windsurfing most weekends if it's fine. Or if it's wet, I go diving, then that way I can stay out of the rain.
Eminently sensible, Mr. Anstey. So when you returned unexpectedly, at what time was that?
It'd be about 1 in the morning.
And on entering the house, what did you see?
Well, it wasn't what I saw so much as what I heard. I heard this sort of grunting noise coming from upstairs. At first I thought it was Bob. I thought maybe he had his girlfriend up there, because they tend to make a bit of noise.
So, you thought it was him grunting?
No, I thought it was his girlfriend grunting. It's one of the reasons I go away at the weekend.
Objection, my lord. My client's sex life is of no relevance to this case.
Yes, granted. Granted, Mrs. Troy. Mr. Triggs, continue and keep it above the brace.
My lord, so you heard a noise, what then?
Well, it was plainly coming from his uncle's room, and the door was half open, so I looked in. And there was Bob, sort of leaning over his uncle, and he was holding this pillow over his face and choking him. And when I finally got it off him, he'd gone blue.
And how blue had he gone, Mr. Anstey? Was he slightly blue or truly blue?
Is it important, Mr. Triggs, to know exactly how blue Mr. Powell had gone? He's not, after all, a piece of litmus paper, is he?
On the contrary, my lord, I believe it will tell us how near to death the victim was.
Oh, very well. Mr. Anstey?
I suppose he was a bit the colour of my tie.
Your tie? Oh, yes, there was obvious reason to be concerned then. Thank you.
And did Mr. Goff ever speak to you of any expectation with regard to his uncle's estate?
Yeah, I think he did expect to inherit it eventually.
Thank you. No further questions.
Mr. Anstey, you say you saw the victim and that he had gone blue.
That's right, yeah.
Could you be more specific? Was that blue or more blue-grey?
Well, yeah, blue-grey, I suppose.
More blue than grey or more grey than blue?
Maybe more grey than blue, perhaps.
Oh, predominantly grey, then, I see. Thank you. Now, Mr. Goff's uncle didn't go out of the house much, I understand.
No, not a lot.
What was his normal complexion?
He was a bit grey-looking, I suppose.
Oh, I see. So his normal complexion was grey, and when you found him, he was grey. So in other words, he looked pretty much the same as usual.
I suppose so, yeah.
So when you imply that he looked half dead when you found him, half dead was the best he ever looked anyway.
Well, I'm not saying he didn't.
Are you saying he did?
No, I'm not saying he did. I'm just not saying he didn't.
Well, if two negatives make a positive, Mr. Anstey, and you aren't not saying that he didn't, and you aren't not saying that he did, what exactly are you saying?
I'm not sure now.
Thank you. No further questions.
I wish to call Mr. Edward Powell.
Call Mr. Edward Powell.
Speaking to us as a regular attender at the Evangelical Tabernacle, Mr. Powell.
My lord, this is irrelevant character building. Even Adolf Hitler went to church occasionally.
Yes, Mr. Triggs, a bit more law, the mightless tabernacle wouldn't go amiss.
I just thought it might be of interest for the jury, my lord. They seem like God-fearing men. And ladies. So, when you awoke on the night in question, Mr. Powell, what did you awake to find?
My nephew, with a pillow in his hand, standing by the bed.
And was he awake or asleep?
I don't know. I assume he was awake. But before I could say anything to him, he attacked me.
Now, some months ago you made a will in your nephew's favour. Was that because you were fond of him?
No, it's because he is my only living relative, and I promised his mother I'd leave him something. I thought he was feckless. All he ever did was get into debt and write his car off.
So, plainly having no affection for your nephew, why did you ever have him in the house?
Well, I was sorry for him, and I'd promised his mother. Anyway, if I hadn't taken him in, he'd probably be out in the streets now with a dog and a bit of string asking if he had any change.
Thank you. No further questions.
Mr. Powell, during the course of the incident, can you be certain that your nephew was aware of what he was doing?
No, but I'm pretty sure I was aware of it, though.
Did you say anything to him?
Yeah, I tried to tell him to get off. And it's difficult to make yourself understood with half a pillow in your mouth.
Did you hear him say anything to you, then? Or did you have half a pillow in your ear as well?
Yeah, he said, "You wash the dishes now, you old..." And then he used an abusive word, my lord, reflecting on my parentage.
Bastard, was it, Mr. Powell?
It wasn't no fun, Your Honour.
I think the witness means it wasn't any fun, my lord. Double negative again.
Thank you, Mrs. Troy. Your concern to find the appropriate word is most commendable.
Laudable, my lord.
And irritating.
Thank you. No other questions? Not good.
I wish to call the medical witness for the Crown, Mr. James Hargreaves.
Call Mr. John Carsleeves.
Mr. Hargreaves, you say in your report that you found no evidence of any dysfunction of the accused, no injuries or contusions, no defects of reaction or comprehension compatible with a recent concussion or a blow to the head.
No, absolutely none at all.
Now, in your experience, Mr. Hargreaves, both as a medical expert and as a frequent fundraiser for missionaries abroad...
My lord, Mr. Hargreaves' experience as a hellraiser has nothing to do with his evidence, I submit.
I said that he was a fundraiser, my lord, not a hellraiser.
I don't care if the witness raises chickens, Mr. Triggs. I warn counsel on both sides to keep a modicum of decorum in this case. Continue.
Say there had been a concussion, what would the expected reaction to it be?
Well, it's variable. Dizziness maybe, nausea, seeing lights, headaches, even blackouts.
But not sleepwalking?
Not in my opinion, no. I'd say Mr. Goff is as sane and as responsible for his actions as you, me, or any member of the jury.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Hargreaves. No further questions.
Mr. Hargreaves, I have here a copy of the Daily Telegraph, June 91, which reports on a successful appeal for a wrongful conviction. The grounds were that this conviction was based on forensic evidence which has since proved unreliable. Can you tell us who gave the medical evidence at that trial?
My lord, I fail to see the relevance of this line of questioning.
You surprise me, Mr. Triggs. It seems pretty obvious from up here. Go on, Mrs. Trott.
Do you know who gave the original and subsequently discredited forensic evidence, Mr. Hargreaves?
Yes, I did. But the fact is...
Thank you. No further questions.
That would conclude the most impressive and extremely convincing case for the Crown, my lord.
Very well. We will adjourn now for lunch. Now, I would recommend the Afro-Caribbean takeaway on the corner to you members of the jury. For a moderately priced, highly nutritious and very tasty lunch, you can do a lot worse than the curried goat and peas with tuna dumplings. We will resume at 2:15.
All will rise.
Peter the Hedgehog nipped back home for lunch. I wonder what's in the larder today, he thought. Maybe some nice juicy worms. Suddenly he heard a voice say...
Oh, you're back then, Mrs. Troy. I've got a few briefs for you. I thought you were in court.
I was. I'm on lunch.
Is that a Prickly Peter story there you're doing?
Is that a door there on which you didn't knock?
You know, we used to read them to our two when they were young.
You're two? I'm not that old, am I?
Yes. Anyway, we had to stop because they were giving them nightmares.
My stories have never given anyone nightmares. It must have been the garlic you put in their cocoa.
Actually, Mrs. Troy, I don't know how you're fixed with your publisher, but I've always fancied myself as a bit of a writer. I've had this idea for some short stories about a barrister's clerk.
Oh, yes, have you? Yes.
By day, he's a barrister's clerk, but at night, he is the avenger of the courts. Have you got a moment?
Well, I must get back, actually, so why don't you just talk into that machine and I'll listen to it later.
Oh, yes, right, cheers. The Avengers of the Courts, Part 1. It was a wet and foggy day down the Gray's Inn Road when a taxi bearing a mysterious pattern... There isn't a tape in here!
Mr. Goff, what has happened to your face?
It was very strange, Mrs. Troy. I dozed off during the lunchtime recess, you see.
When, lo and behold, I began to walk in my sleep, just as on the night in question, and I banged my head, sustaining some visible damage, so that those of little faith in the jury could see and could believe. Only I don't think they're going to, Mr. Goff.
It doesn't seem to be going very well, does it?
It'll go a good deal worse if you start headbutting the brickwork.
Look, I know the case looks bad, but sometimes the truth is hard to believe. Well, what when you can't convince people of that? Are you supposed to go to prison then for something you haven't done?
All right. But the judge is going to ask what happened to your face now. Are you sure you didn't fall down the stairs?
Fall down the stairs? Oh, with you. Yeah, I think that is what I meant, actually.
Mr. Goff, have you had an accident during the lunchtime recess?
I fell down the spiral staircase, sir.
You fell?
Yes, sir.
Well, if that's what you tell me, I shall have to believe it. But if one more defendant falls down the stairs in my court, or so much as trips and bruises his ego, heads will roll.
The jury think they've beaten him up.
Yeah, it's terrible, isn't it, the way judges can distort the facts.
Counsel, if you're ready.
Yes, my lord. I call Mr. Robert Goff.
Call Mr. Robert Goff.
And And the next thing I remember is being woken up and told that I'd attacked him.
Thank you, Mr. Goff.
Mr. Goff, now you say you retired early on the night in question, without saying your prayers. At about what time did you go to bed?
Somewhere between 8 and 9, I suppose. I don't remember precisely. I wasn't feeling too well.
Ah, yes, due to the alleged blow to the head you had received during the afternoon's alleged rugby match. So naturally you went to the hospital for a check-up as soon as possible?
I just felt that if I could get some sleep, I'd be all right.
Now, did you know that your uncle had made a will in your favour?
No.
But you expected to inherit his estate?
No, he had a saloon.
His legal estate, Mr. Goff, not his estate car. Or is a murder charge a frivolous matter? I ask you again, did you expect to inherit his money?
I suppose so. Eventually, yes.
When he died?
I could hardly inherit it while he was still alive.
Indeed you couldn't, Mr. Goff. The very point I wish to make. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Triggs. Mrs. Troy.
I'd like to call Mr. Christopher Pringle, my lord.
Call Mr. Chris Tingle.
Mr. Pringle, when you are in the witness box, would you please show some respect for this court and stand up?
I am standing up, Your Honour.
We'll see that you do that.
Mr. Pringle, you were in the team which played a game of rugby against Mr. Goff's team on the day in question. Is that correct?
Yes, it is. I play as a front row forward in the stable lads 15.
And this is a position which, despite obvious handicaps of weight and size, you have earned on personal merit.
That is correct, yes.
I believe at one time you even had a trial for Slough Rugby Club. Is that so?
Yes, it is, but I was unable to take up the place that they offered me due to my many racing commitments.
Have you met the defendant on previous occasions, Mr. Pringle?
Yes, last year, when I played in the scrum, hooking for the Aintree Barbarians.
You had reason to remember this encounter?
Yes, he tackled me in what I considered to be an unfair manner, and I was subjected to verbal abuse by members of his team. They called me names connected with my size. Names like skyscraper.
Sizest names, in fact, Mr. Pringle. Quite deplorable. So tell me, what happened on the day in question?
Well, it was a bit of a scrummage for the ball, and Mr. Goff there fell to the ground, and I noticed when the ref's back was turned that he was in slight difficulties, so I tried to help him to his feet.
And were you successful in this?
Only partly, for when I went to kick a divot of mud out of his way for fear that he might trip over it, I sadly misjudged my shot and kicked him in the head instead. Unfortunately, this happened some 4 or 5 times.
What a sad catalogue of misfortunes, Mr. Pringle, for so good a Samaritan.
And what was Mr. Goff's reaction to this?
Well, he went a bit woozy in his mind. He started swearing at me, and he seemed to be under the impression that I was actually kicking him deliberately. I put this down to his confused mental state.
Do you feel, Mr. Pringle, that the succession of kicks which you sadly inflicted through no fault of your own may have caused Mr. Goff to act as he later did?
I do feel that I may bear a certain degree of indirect responsibility, yes.
Thank you, Mr. Pringle.
Mr. Pringle, may I ask if you have any strong religious convictions?
No, just a fine once for speeding.
And have you ever been kicked in the skull in the course of a rugby match or during your racing career, perhaps by a horse?
Yes, many times. The doctors do tell me that at one time or another I've broken practically every bone in my head.
And have you ever attempted to murder your uncle as a result?
No, never. But then I don't have an uncle.
Perhaps it's just as well, Mr. Pringle. No further questions.
Thank you, Mr. Pringle. Any other witnesses, Mrs. Troy?
Just one, my lord. If I may have a moment? What has happened to our medical expert?
I'm very sorry about this, Mrs. Troy, but he was on his way to the court when he was arrested for curb crawling.
Mrs. Troy, we're wasting time.
Unfortunately, our witness has been delayed, my lord. Some trouble with his car. If I may submit his report in his absence?
Mr. Triggs?
Well, very well, my lord. Just this once.
Hand it round, then take us through it, then, Mrs. Troy. After which, counsel for the prosecution will make his closing speech, members of the jury. Then counsel for the defence will do the same. And I shall give my completely objective, impartial and unbiased summing up, shan't I, Mr. Triggs?
My lord.
Then, members of the jury, it's all in your hands.
His sole defence, members of the jury, is that he walked in his sleep. Now, were the accusations not so serious, this defence would be almost laughable. Ha, 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 ha.
Would you like a glass of water, Mr. Triggs?
No, thank you, my lord. I'm fine. I suggest, members of the jury, that this entire defence is a hodgepodge of lies from start to finish, a medley of misleading statements, a casserole of deceit, a veritable stew of mendacity.
The counsel is implying that the accused is telling fibs, members of the jury.
It is a dangerous and desperate defence of a dangerous and desperate but cunning man caught in the very act of murder. So, ladies and gentlemen, I ask you to return the verdict of guilty. For not only is it the right verdict, but also it is the righteous one. Bless you all, and thank you. I shall remember you in my prayers.
And intent is the essence of the crime. So, members of the jury, in order for you to convict, prosecution must have proved beyond doubt that Mr. Goff intended to kill his uncle. I maintain that the prosecution has not and cannot do this because Mr. Goff simply did not know what he was doing.
Are we listening for pins, Mrs. Troy?
Just pausing for effect, my lord.
Oh, well, if it's had the desired one.
Members of the jury, I ask that Mr. Goff be acquitted. For if his uncle was a victim, so too was Mr. Goff. The victim of a tragic sequence of events over which he had neither control nor knowledge. I ask, therefore, that you bring in the only possible verdict, a verdict of not guilty.
Do you find the defendant guilty or not guilty?
Not guilty.
You have found him not guilty. This is the verdict of you all.
It is.
But he did it! He had a duvet down my throat! He tried to kill me!
Order!
This isn't right! This isn't justice!
Mr. Powell, it's the verdict. We can't have everything.
Thanks again, Mrs. Troy. Mr. Bryant, thank you all very much. Well, I might have some celebrating to do.
Yes, of course. Good luck. Another satisfied customer?
Yes. You do believe he's innocent, don't you?
Susan, half the art of being a barrister lies in asking the right question.
Yes.
That wasn't the right question.
Right, Phil, I'll buy you a drink. Great. Uncle Ted, look, sorry about everything. No hard feelings, eh?
When you've found somewhere to stay, Robert, I'll send your stuff on after I've changed my will.
Why, you miserable old... Cut me out just for that? Well, you watch out then, because next time I'll make sure I'm not interrupted. You understand me? Maybe next time I'll plan things a bit better.
Bob.
Out of the way.
Good job you can't be tried for the same thing twice, isn't it, Arthur?
We defended him, Mrs. Troy.
Someone had to.
But how do we sleep with ourselves?
Well, frankly, Arthur, just at this moment, I haven't got anyone else I can sleep with. But you never know, do you, when your luck will change? The hedgehog snuffled along the garden path until he came to the dustbins, where he found a large bin liner smelling of delicious week-old cabbage. Hello, hello, what is it?
Mrs. Troy,
Stephen.
your instructing solicitor and the client are still waiting.
Yes.
They have been waiting for half an hour.
That's not so long.
I just thought you'd like me to let you know.
It's very inconvenient, clients interrupting me when I'm busy. Why can't I just see them in court 5 minutes before the case starts?
Yes, Mrs. Troy. Or possibly after the verdict.
Send them in, Stephen. I've lost my thread anyway.
Well, here it is.
Yes. You're quite the illustrated man, Mr. Taylor. You seem to have the summer exhibition hanging up there.
I've got quite an interesting one of a snake here, if you want to see it. Goes right round my body.
No, that's all right. I'm not really a collector. Oh, that's a nice one. Angie Forever. That's your wife, is it?
No, Cheryl. Me and Angie didn't last.
So Angie Forever really should have been Angie temporarily, should it?
A bit of a sparky brief, isn't she?
We hire her for a fire, Mr. Taylor.
Well, this is the one it's all about here, as you can see.
Yes, thank you. So, how did it get there?
Well, I'm a bit of a football fan, like a Hatters supporter.
Luton Town Football Club, Mrs. Troy.
Yes, Arthur, they do let me out every now and again.
Anyway, it was after the big match, and we'd had a result, like.
You mean you won, don't you?
Yeah.
Because if you'd lost, you'd still have had a result. You just wouldn't have had a favourable one, would you?
Yeah. Well, we'd had this favourable result, like, and a few pints after. And it was around about 7 when I got to thinking I'd maybe get a bit of a tattoo done to celebrate the occasion. As you do when you're feeling cheerful.
Yes, no danger of you ever having one then, eh, Arthur?
So I go down the parlour and I tell the bloke what I want. I ask for a tattoo saying, "Up the Hatters." And he says, yeah, no problem, he can fix that. So off he goes. Only when he's finished and I come to look at it, he hasn't done "Up the Hatters." He's done what you can see there.
Yes, up your Harris.
As a sort of slang expression, Mrs. Troy, it means,
I
well...
know what it means.
Aris?
Aristotle.
Bottle?
Bottle and glass, yes.
Anyway, it's an awful thing to have on you, that, isn't it? I mean, it's hampering my activities, not to mention my mental distress.
Mr. Taylor wrestles semi-professionally, Mrs. Troy. He thus has frequent cause to remove his shirt.
Yes. Well, there's probably plenty to go for, then. There's negligence, assault, aggravated damages.
Well, that tattooist, he knew what I asked for, right? He done it deliberate.
Why did he do it deliberate? Why didn't he do it undeliberate?
I don't know. He must have took against me for some reason. But you're the Wigan loopholes, aren't you? It's up to you to find that out in the cross purposes.
Yes, but I am a barrister, Mr. Taylor, not a private detective. We advocate. We don't investigate.
Oh, well, he says you're the best brief for it. He says you specialise in this kind of case.
Oh, what kind of case is that?
Sort of case no one else wants.
Oh, I hope I'm not getting an ulcer.
Anything in particular you'd like me to do in court?
No, Susan, just watch my every move, hang on my every word, have a fast car waiting. What's that you're reading, Gerald? Looking for loopholes?
Just taking the comfort of the Old Testament, Sister Troy. No loopholes in here.
Just give me 5 minutes with it, I'll find plenty.
No doubt. I'm sure there's many a donkey, Mrs. Troy, who's gone lame, you having talked the hind leg off it.
Who's the judge, do you know?
Witticism Wallace again, I'm afraid. You've heard of alternative comedy? This is alternative judiciary. Shall we go? Come on. And what was the tattoo you asked for, Mr. Taylor?
Up the Hatters, Mum.
And what was the tattoo you received?
Up your Harris, Mum.
Mr. Taylor. Will you keep a civil tongue in your head when addressing counsel in this court?
That was the tattoo, my lord.
What? Oh, yes. Yes, of course. Carry on.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor, that is all.
Mr. Triggs.
Oh, Mr. Taylor, may I ask, in the course of an average week, say, how often you trouble to kneel down by your bedside and say your evening prayers?
What for? I'm not ill.
My lord, counsel as ever is back in the pulpit again. We'll be having his views on the ordination of women next.
I'd certainly like to hear his opinions on the appointment of female barristers, Mrs. Troy, but I agree with your objection. Restraint, please, Mr. Triggs.
So, Mr. Taylor, speaking to us as a non-prayer, what would you say your condition was when you entered Mr. Romford's tattoo emporium?
How do you mean condition? I mean, I'm pretty fit, like. I go down the gym 3 nights a week pumping.
Pumping? Pumping what?
Iron, my lord.
Are you some kind of blacksmith, Mr. Taylor?
No, weight training, Your Honour. I go weightlifting 3 nights a week. I get a lift down there.
Who gives you a lift down there?
No. I mean, I feel better for doing it. A buzz, that sort of lift.
Oh, I see. But go on, Mr. Triggs. It seems a bit like English as a foreign language here this morning.
And had you anything to drink at this time, Mr. Taylor? Anything alcoholic?
Yeah, I'd had a couple, on account of we were celebrating getting a favourable result. So I'd had a couple of beers in the pub after, yeah. But nothing out of the ordinary.
I see. And how many exactly, Mr. Taylor, are there in a couple?
7 or 8.
Yes. A very happy couple too, I'm sure.
My lord, my client is not on trial here for his drinking habits, nor indeed on trial at all. If liking a drink was an offence, my lord, I respectfully submit that half the bench would be under the bench and the rest would be in the dock.
Yes, crank the handle, Mr. Triggs, if you would. Speed it up.
The point I wish to make, my lord, is that by the time Mr. Taylor had come to the frame of mind to want to tattoo, he was not only incoherent with his team having got a result, but he was also possibly inarticulate with alcohol. Were you, Mr. Taylor, inarticulate with alcohol?
No, I couldn't have said that. Not on 8 pints. That's just a cup of tea to me.
I see. So what was your reaction when you found that Mr. Romford had tattooed up your Harris on your chest?
Oh, I was so over the moon about it, I asked him to tattoo Cheeky on my backside.
Mr. Taylor, there are permissible witticisms in this court, and there is contempt. Just answer the question, please.
Well, I was upset about it, Your Honour, of course, as anyone would be.
Yes. So, did you attempt to strike Mr. Romford?
No, he did a runner. So I rang for the police. By the time they got there, he locked himself in the carsy.
The carsy? Ah, yes, the carsy, my lord, is a slang name for the lavatory.
I know what a carsy is, thank you, Mr. Triggs. I haven't spent my life just sitting up here.
No, indeed. No further questions.
You wish to re-examine on any points, Mrs. Troy?
Yes, my lord, I do.
Well, as we began late this morning, it may be as well to have an early lunch which will give us more of an afternoon. Now, if anyone is wondering where to eat, I can strongly recommend the tapas bar on the corner, Carambas, where Spanish delicacies and a jug of sangria can be obtained at very competitive prices. Adjourned until 2.
Pork rice.
Mr. Taylor, it has been implied that because you had consumed some 8 pints of beer before visiting Mr. Romford's tattoo parlour, you were therefore the worse for drink. Is this so?
No, I've never been the worst for drink. Drink, to my mind, has always been a great improvement.
Now, Mr. Taylor, could you say up the hatters for me in an intoxicated voice?
Intoxicated? Oh, up the hatters.
Up the hatters, my lord, you see? Up the hatters.
Up the hatter-ta-ta-ta. Yes, Mrs. Troy, very colloquial. Sort of thing Philip Larkin might have written.
And yet that wasn't what Mr. Romford tattooed on your chest, was it? No, he tattooed up your Harris. Not an accidental mishearing, but a considered act of sabotage. And now, has this tattoo made a difference to your professional career?
It has. I'm now subjected to humiliation and contumely in the ring, and have to wear a singlet to hide my shame.
And is this a problem to you at all?
Yes, it puts me at a disadvantage. My opponents grab hold of it and use it to hang me up in the corner. I feel like a bit of a duffel bag, Your Honour. And instead of being known as Dave the Disemboweler, I'm now known as Up Yours Dave.
And have you considered having this tattoo removed?
Yeah, but it's a difficult and expensive operation. And painful, so I'm a bit stuck with it, really.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor, that is all. My lord, I'd now like to call Mr. Taylor's tag team partner. Call Mr. Michael Kennedy.
Call Mick the Brick.
Shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. God help us. God help you.
Mr. Kennedy, have we torn you away from an afternoon's tea dancing?
Oh, I work as a doorman down at the Stag and Chestnut on Wednesdays, sir, and I'm going round there after the trial. I'm employed to keep the roughs out.
What a coincidence. I'm employed to put them in. Mrs. Troy?
Mr. Kennedy, could you tell us what relationship you have with Mr. Taylor?
Well, I don't have any relationship with him. We're happily married men. Oh, you must be thinking of George and Henry, ma'am, the wrestlers that can't be parted.
No. Your professional relationship, Mr. Kennedy.
Oh, yeah, I'm his tag wrestling partner.
Wrestling under the name of Mick the Brick.
Yeah, that's right.
Now, Mr. Kennedy, before this tattooing incident, would you have described yours and Mr. Taylor's partnership as successful?
Yeah, very successful. Never lost a bout, bar one where we was robbed.
And has this success continued since Mr. Taylor's tattoo?
No, we become something of a laughing stock.
And have you lost work through this as well as reputation?
Yeah, a few months ago we were topping the bill. Now we're just small print. If it goes on like this, we'll soon be illegible.
No further.
Mr. Kennedy, are you a religious man?
Oh, my lord, dig deep. Counsel's coming round with a war cry again.
My lord, he did put his hand on the good book.
Yes, the question will be discounted, Mrs. Troy, but for curiosity's sake, we'll hear the answer. Mr. Kennedy.
Yeah, I am a religious man, sir. I used to be a sinner once and associated with rough companions, but thankfully I was saved. And now on a Sunday I often go out on the highways and byways and I wrestle for Jesus, sir.
And do you get many converts that way, Mr. Kennedy?
Yeah, several every week, sir. You get their arms up behind their backs and they very soon see the light.
What it is to have the gift of the gab.
Thank you, Mr. Kennedy.
Mr. Kennedy, before you stand down, for my own personal interest, tell me, are these wrestling bouts actually fixed?
Your Honour, please. One may as well ask, are the British courts of justice fixed?
I see. Thank you, Mr. Kennedy. I think you've cleared up that point. Mrs. Troy.
Oh, that concludes the case for the plaintiff, my lord.
Your pigeon, Mr. Tree.
I should like to call the defendant, Mr. George Romford.
Call Mr. George Pomford.
Romford. Here.
Thank you, Mr. Romford. I hadn't realised what great churchgoers and evangelists you tattooists were. I only wish we could have seen the young lady upon whom you tattooed the whole of the New Testament for ourselves. No further questions.
Mrs. Troy, do you wish to cross-examine?
Yes, I do, my lord. How many years have you been a professional tattooist, Mr. Romford?
What, in the skin trade? 20 years on and off.
Ah, and you can recall when the plaintiff, Mr. Taylor, came to your shop?
Oh, yeah. In view of the trouble he brought with him.
What tattoo did he ask for?
He chose some fancy scroll work for his chest, as I remember. And he wanted me to write "Up Your Harris" on it, in italics.
And you're sure that's what he said?
Definite.
Oh, I see. He asked for it definite, did he? I suppose he asked for it definite because he didn't happen to have an adverb on him at the time, which prevented him from asking for it definitely.
Mrs. Troy, could we have our grammar lesson another day? Allow us to swiftly move on, please.
To move swiftly on, my lord, split in thinking. So, didn't you think this was a somewhat odd and curious request, asking for "Up Your Harris" so definite?
Well, I get a lot of people in asking for some very odd tattoos. Sometimes in a lot of very odd places.
What kind of places, Mr. Romford?
Often inaccessible ones, Your Honour.
And are you able to oblige them?
Well, I do my best to accommodate them, so yes. Although sometimes I do have to use the long handle.
There's nothing more fascinating than other people's occupations.
You always give people the tattoo they ask for, do you, Mr. Roth?
Well, I'm not in the business of putting myself out of work.
So you didn't ask Mr. Taylor why he should want such a strange tattoo, or go through the spelling of it with him?
No, I find usually it's best not to. I mean, you can't always reason with them, especially if they've had a few.
How long did it take for you to complete the tattoo?
About an hour and a half.
And during that time, what did Mr. Taylor talk about? Football, perhaps?
I don't remember.
Oh, really? So while you were giving him the needle, he didn't mention the match he'd been to that afternoon?
Well, he may have mentioned it, I don't know.
Ah, so he may have talked at length about the success of his team, Luton Town Football Club, the Hatters. But it never once occurred to you that what he wanted on his chest was "Up the Hatters" and not "Up Your Harris."
No, I was concentrating on the work in hand and couldn't afford to be distracted.
A matter of considerable importance has come up, Mrs. Troy, I'm afraid. We'll need to have a brief adjournment.
The court will rise.
What do you mean they towed it away? I left my spare wig on the dashboard.
I have the feeling that this could have all been a big mistake.
Most litigation usually is, Arthur, unless someone else is paying for it. You see, people think the law is a ass. It isn't. It's a banana skin. The ass is what you land on afterwards.
I still don't feel very well, Mrs. Troy. I hope I haven't got cirrhosis of the liver.
You don't drink, Arthur.
I did have a glass of sherry at Christmas. Perhaps I should cut down.
Where's the client gone?
To the gents, I think.
He's probably got full instructions tattooed on that as well.
Excuse me.
Well, someone's going to have to pay for it. It's not going to be me. You can come out of public funds.
What do you think, Susan? Would you trust him with your chest?
Trust him with a tea chest.
Do you see what Romford's got there?
Yes.
I think we've got him. Mr. Romford, as we returned to court just now after the adjournment, I observed you had a scarf in your pocket.
A scarf? Did I?
My lord, I fail to see the relevance of Mr. Romford's upper neck apparel. Surely there's nothing wrong with a muffler for the throat's sake.
So do I, but I trust Mrs. Troy will rapidly make the connection.
Yes, I will, my lord. Do you have the scarf with you?
Yes, it's in my pocket.
May we see it? Would you hold it up for the court? Thank you. Now, what kind of scarf is it, Mr. Romford?
It's wool.
Is it really? Why, and just for a moment there, I was thinking you'd made it out of a plank of wood.
Yes, you're being deliberately obtuse here, Mr. Rumford, because if you're not, I hope you're not trying to be clever.
Do the colours of the scarf represent anything, Mr. Romford?
They're a football club's colours.
Which football club?
Arsenal, the Gunners.
The Gunners, really? Are you a Gunners supporter?
Yeah, suppose so.
A very keen supporter. You're quite a regular, are you, down at Highbury?
Yeah, I suppose I am.
You have a season ticket?
Yeah, well, it's only a seasonal one, like.
You travel to all the matches?
Now and again.
Which, Mr. Romford? Now and again, or again and again?
Well, I suppose I see most of them.
Ah, so you'd know who the Gunners were playing on the day that Mr. Taylor here received the fateful tattoo. Who were they playing, Mr. Romford?
Luton.
Luton? The Hatters? Who won?
I don't remember.
You don't remember? A man with his own seasonal season ticket who travels to all the matches and you don't remember whether your team won or lost?
Well, the Hatters maybe got it, I suppose, but it was only 1-0. And if the referee had decided to put his brains in that day, it might have been a lot different.
Yes, Mr. Romford, you was robbed, no doubt. How did you feel when your team had lost?
A bit disappointed.
Or was it bitterly disappointed, Mr. Romford, so that when Mr. Taylor came into your tattoo parlour, boasting how his team had won and asking for a tattoo to celebrate, this was all as so much salt and vinegar rubbed into your already tender chips?
Well, it might have cheesed me up a bit, yeah.
But why should it cheese you off, Mr. Romford, that Mr. Taylor should ask for a tattoo saying, "Up your Harris"? Your Harris isn't a football team, is it? If it's associated with any sport at all, it would be more in the realms of potholing. No, had he said, "Up the Hatters," that could understandably have cheesed you off, but you claim he didn't say that. So what did he say that made you so rancidly cheddared?
Well, I don't remember now.
No further questions?
Well, I don't remember.
You wish to re-examine Mr. Triggs?
I don't think so, no, my lord, though I might have some quite devastating observations to make during my closing remarks. Perhaps. Some controversial points which might alter the entire nature of the case, my lord. Maybe.
Carry on then, Mr. Triggs.
I just can't quite find them at the moment, my lord.
So, Mr. Romford, angry and disappointed at his team having lost, looked for somewhere to vent his spleen. And it was upon Mr. Taylor that he vented it. Now, Mr. Taylor doesn't deny he had been celebrating that day. Yes, he does enjoy a game of football and a few pints on a Saturday afternoon, don't we all? I know I do.
Do you really, Mrs. Troy? I would have thought Wimbledon and strawberries much more your style.
Oh, a poor widow must take her pleasures where she can find them, my lord.
Yes, fair enough. Well, I'm glad that you're getting out a bit now, Mrs. Troy. It's a positive step, because we were all very sad when Mr. Troy so suddenly weren't we, Mr. Triggs?
Yes, indeed, my lord, very sad. I think I can speak for us all when I say that the Lord giveth and the Lord... Very sad.
We were all very sad, Mrs. Troy, if I may say.
Thank you. Thank you all. You're all so very kind.
Yes, well, and continue, Mrs. Troy, if it's not too much.
My lord. Mr. Taylor, my lord, is no longer the man he once was. He is now like a wall vandalized by graffiti artists. Obscenities sprayed across his chest, the very door to himself defaced. What does his wife feel like when they go to bed at night, when perhaps seeking a matrimonial cuddle she snuggles near, only to be greeted by the awful words, "Up your hand," striking her like a blow in the face? My lord, Mr. Taylor came here to seek justice. Please do not deny it to him.
Yeah.
And I think that in order for us to believe that Mr. Rumford would tattoo the words he did on a client without question, without expressing interest, surprise, or curiosity, we would first have to believe that Mr. Rumford was a fool. And he is patently, to my mind, no such thing. I find, for the plaintiff, Mr. Taylor, damages to be assessed, I think, Mrs. Troy, like a little time on that.
Ah, here he comes. Dry white, how's that?
Thanks. I'm a bit more used to a pint, really, but cheers.
You sure lime cordial is all you want, Mr. Kennedy?
Yeah, much obliged, thanks, but I quit the drink when I saw the light. Wrestling's not like the law, you see. You have to keep your wits about you in wrestling. I suppose you lot more have to keep your writs about you, don't you?
You sure you don't want anything, Arthur?
I don't think so. I'll just have a Alka-Seltzer.
Too much last night, eh, Mr. Bryant? So, we won then. Cheers.
Yes, we did. Cheers.
Cheers.
Yeah. Oh, what's your damage, by the way, Mrs. Troy?
Oh, don't worry. Romford pays your costs.
Oh, good. What, you get him to tattoo you a cheque, do you?
Bit of a Pyrrhic victory, though, isn't it?
Pyrrhic? Who's that, then? We haven't fought them, have we? The Pyrrhics?
He means you won, but at what cost? You've still got the tattoo.
Yeah, well, not exactly. Yes and no.
What do you mean? Not exactly.
I mean, I've still got it, but it doesn't say what it did. I had a bit more done to it somewhere else. Got it turned into a mermaid.
You did what?
Had it turned into a mermaid. You wouldn't recognise it now. It looks lovely. Do you want to see it?
Mr. Taylor.
Yeah?
Mr. Taylor, to assess the aggravated damages, Mr. Justice Wallace will want to see your chest.
Yeah?
To take another look at that awful tattoo that you are going to have to live with for the rest of your life, and for which he is going to award you a huge sum of money in compensation.
Yeah?
But your distress is no longer there, is it, Mr. Taylor? You haven't got an awful tattoo anymore, have you? In fact, now, your distress is your delight.
What do you mean? You mean I won't get anything?
To put it into the vernacular, Mr. Taylor, we was robbed.
We was robbed?
We was robbed. Definite. Stood on deck and looked towards the horizon. His prickles bristled in the cold sea air, as he remembered the rhyme old Uncle Pegleg Reg had taught him. Red sky at night, hedgehog's delight. Red sky in the morning, weasel's warning.
Morning. Brief in your cubbyhole, you missed it.
Never mind brief, curt to the point of rudeness, I'd say.
What?
Stephen, I bought that door so people would have something to knock on.
Oh, yes. Sorry, Mrs. Troy, I'm run off them this morning. 2 double bookings and a no-show. I sometimes think running Chambers is a bit like having a stable at Newmarket. Pitchfork would come in handy.
A little more hay in the nosebag wouldn't do any harm. What is it, anyway? Not another divorce. I'm sick of people and their petty domestic problems.
Oh, me too. Get all that at home. No, it's quite an interesting one, Mrs. Troy. I thought you'd like to have it. Something to get your teeth into.
Why, what is it, then?
Cannibalism.
Cannibalism? Well, it'll cost them an arm and a leg.
Aha!
Susan! Workies!
Well, it seems unprecedented.
Can't be. There's nothing new in the world of crime. Even originality is an infringement of copyright.
But can you actually have a murder trial without a body?
Yes, of course, why not? What about that gangland killing back in '85? All they could do was point to the motorway and say he's in there somewhere.
I suppose that's what you call concrete evidence.
Boom.
Ah, here's a president. Back in 1856, another shipwreck. The cabin boy.
Dudley and Stevens.
Apparently he was already on the way out. Seemed ashamed to waste him.
Keep looking.
But there aren't any witnesses either. Are there? I mean, no victim, no witness. No case, I'd have thought.
There is mute but eloquent testimony, Susan, which by its very silence speaks volumes.
What's that?
The missing man's wedding ring.
Why? Where did they find it?
In the survivor's stomach. Does stick in your throat a bit, doesn't it?
We both worked in advertising, you see, Mrs. Troy. Quite successfully. In fact, we helped to get the present government elected.
Well, there won't be any reason to mention that to the jury.
This round-the-world trip was a sort of once-in-a-lifetime thing.
How far did you get, exactly?
Oh, over halfway. We made a couple of stops for refits and so on, and we stopped once or twice to take on extra crew. We were on the return leg when we had the collision.
With what?
A whale.
A whale?
Yes. I don't know what happened. You know, it almost seemed to attack the boat in a way.
Maybe it mistook you for a Norwegian, Mr. Clements. Should have had your Greenpeace T-shirt on.
Not just at the moment, if you don't mind, Arthur.
Yes, sorry.
Anyway, the boat went down in minutes. It was terrifying. We only just had time to get the life rafts off, and that was it. We lashed them together so that we wouldn't get separated. After we'd been at sea for about a month, I woke up one morning and Brian had gone. That's all I know. I never saw him again.
How did you keep going, Mr. Clements, once you'd run out of supplies?
Rainwater when it fell. Fish.
Fish?
When I could catch them.
How did you cook them?
I didn't.
Morning, Gerald.
Mrs. Troy.
Persecuting again, I see.
Prosecuting, yes. Makes you wonder what sort of world we're living in when a man can eat his friends.
It's called the world of free enterprise, isn't it, Gerald? In fact, I thought you voted for it. Excuse me.
And thus it came to pass, my lord, that the accused was eventually picked up by a Cornish trawler and brought into port suffering from acute exposure.
Acute exposure, yes.
While in hospital, my lord, the accused complained of serious abdominal pains.
I get those.
And it was found necessary to intervene medically. Some portions of undigested bone were removed, along with a man's wedding ring engraved with the faint but discernible initials BD. BD, my lord, are the initials of Mr. Clements' absent sailing companion, and it was upon this discovery that the police were called in.
Thank you, Mr. Triggs. Your first witness?
I should like to call Captain Theodore Swift, my lord.
Call Captain Swift, and quick about it.
So, you spotted the life raft, Captain Swift, and you passed not by on the other side. You stopped your trawler. What then?
Well, we got him on board and realised who he was, so I asked him about his partner, thinking he might still be out there.
Yes, and how did he reply? Do you remember his exact words?
Well, I said, "Where's your mate, son? Isn't he with you?" And he said, "Yeah, but he's gone."
What then?
Well, we offered him something to eat, but he said he wasn't hungry.
Well, didn't you find that extremely unusual?
Well, yes. I mean, 8 weeks with 3 weeks' rations. You would have thought he'd been able to manage a couple of pasties.
Thank you, Captain Swift. No further questions.
Swift, after 8 weeks adrift at sea, what would your reaction be if someone waved a couple of pasties under your nose?
Well, I would have given it some thought.
But is it not the case that prolonged malnutrition can lead to suppression of appetite?
Oh, he didn't look that malnourished. I mean, he wasn't exactly Slim Pickens.
My lord, Slim Pickens, I believe, was an actor in cowboy films.
Thank you, Mr. Triggs. We are indebted to you for that.
I mean, he must have been eating something out there. I mean, he wasn't getting pizza delivered.
Did Mr. Clements smell when you brought him on board, Captain?
Smell, I should say. He smelt of fish. He couldn't have stank much worse.
Oh, really? I suppose he couldn't have stank much worse, Captain Swift, because stanking much worse would have been a lot less good than learning how to speak more better.
Mrs. Troy.
Just attempting to illustrate the widespread misuse of the double comparative, my lord.
If we could forget the grammar for the moment, Mrs. Troy, and stick to the case proper.
Properly, my lord.
Instantly, Mrs. Troy.
So, why do you think he smelt of fish? Because he'd been eating them, perhaps?
I suppose.
So fish alone could have kept him alive?
Well, if he'd caught enough. But what I'd like to know is how he managed to do that without as much as a fishhook. I mean, I've got a net a mile long, and there are some days when all I come back with is the one that got away.
Yes, it was fortunate that you happened to be out in your trawler when you picked up Mr. Clements, wasn't it, Captain?
From his point of view, yeah.
So you hadn't yet filled your quota for the month, then?
Quota?
Your fishing quota?
Oh, fishing quota.
Had you not filled it for the month? I must remind you before you answer that copies of the fisheries returns are available upon request.
Well, well, maybe I had reached my quota, but we weren't exactly fishing at the time. We were more involved in net trials.
Net trials? Oh, I see. So you were out in your trawler with a full crew, using expensive diesel, the whole trip probably costing many £1,000s, purely for the purpose of net trials?
Safety first is what I always say, ma'am. You can't be too careful at sea. As many a skipper has come to grief through not fully testing his nets.
Thank you, Captain Swift. Having heard the explanation of why you were at sea that day, I feel sure the jury will be able to gauge accurately the quality of the rest of your evidence. Thank you. No further questions.
Well, we did save his life, you know.
Yes, Captain Swift, and we greatly appreciate your actions. You may stand down.
Well, if anyone thinks it's an easy life, let him walk a mile in my Wellingtons.
There. Press on, Mr. Triggs.
If I may call the next witness for the Crown, my lord, I like to call Mrs. Rosemary Pope.
Call the Pope.
Mrs. Pope.
Call the Pope's missus.
Mrs. Pope, can you tell the court who you are?
I was the consultant in charge of the intensive care ward where Mr. Clements was taken after his rescue from the sea.
And in what medical condition was he?
He was suffering from acute exposure and dehydration, and he had pneumonia. He also had some very unpleasant sores on his body caused by his constant contact with the seawater. But mentally, he was fairly alert and overall, considering his ordeal, in remarkably good health.
In all respects?
He did complain of abdominal pains.
I get those.
Upon investigation, these proved to be due to what?
To some partially digested bone matter and a ring lodged in the intestine.
These items?
Yes.
Exhibits 1 and 2, my lord, if the jury would like to see them.
I don't know if they would, Mr. Triggs, considering where they've been, but hand them around.
And were you able to identify the exact nature of these bones, Mrs. Pope?
They seem to be the remains of finger joints. Knuckles.
Knuckles? And to the best of your knowledge, Mrs. Pope, are there any fish in the sea with knuckles?
Fish don't have knuckles, Mr. Triggs. What a preposterous proposition.
If I may help, learned counsel, my
Yes,
lord.
please, Mrs. Troy.
I think perhaps the counsel is confusing in his mind fish knuckles with fish nuggets, my lord. Well, it seems to me that these fish knuckles are nothing but red herrings.
Very good, Mrs. Troy.
I'm merely trying to make a point by asking a rhetorical question. That is a question that does not require an answer,
Well,
my
if your
lord.
questions don't require an answer, Mr. Triggs, what is the witness doing here?
I fear I am unable to answer that, my lord, as that is in itself also something of a rhetorical question.
Well, if no one's going to answer any questions in this court, well, how can we have a trial? Can someone answer that?
Seems to be going rather well for us, doesn't it?
If I may conduct my examination in my own way, my lord.
Yes, very well. Conduct an examination. I think he needs one.
Sir, these bone fragments were conclusively of animal origin, Mrs. Pope?
I would say so.
Of human origin?
That is my opinion.
Thank you, Mrs. Pope. No further questions.
Mrs. Troy, you wish to muscle in on the knuckles?
Mrs. Pope, it being the case, as his lordship is so brilliantly established, that fish lack knuckles, is it not yet also true that some fish do have a very large skeletal structure?
Yes, I suppose.
Sharks, for example. Swordfish, dolphins, seahorses, octopus even.
Mrs. Troy, are you attempting to tell this court that the reason why the accused had undigested bits of bone inside him was because he'd swallowed an octopus?
I'm trying to show, my lord, that large fragments of bone can have maritime as well as animal origin.
And what about the ring, Mrs. Troy? This was a married octopus, was it? No doubt swimming away from the registry office at the time, with bits of tins rattling behind him.
Not going so well now.
I wish to put to the witness, my lord, the very real possibility that the fragments of bone we see here are not conclusively of animal origin.
Ah, Mrs. Pope.
I am satisfied in my own mind that the bones are undoubtedly animal.
Satisfied on the basis of what qualifications, Mrs. Pope?
On the qualification of a first-class honours degree and a doctorate, of having published internationally acclaimed research, and of being one of the first ever women consultants to be appointed to her post.
I see. No real qualifications in particular, then.
Very well, I propose we adjourn now for lunch. Now, I had intended to recommend today the Chop House to you, members of the jury, but considering the nature of the case, I think perhaps the vegetarian snack bar along the street would be better. I would avoid the lentils if I were you. Court adjourned. Corporal Royce.
So your husband and Mr. Clements have known each other for some time, Mrs. Dart.
Oh, yes. Brian and Bill were very good friends. More like brothers, really. They sailed a lot together, and this trip was a once-in-a-lifetime thing. Bill's girlfriend and I, well, we sort of depended on each other when they went missing.
A very difficult time, Mrs. Dart.
I suppose after the first month, we more or less gave up hope.
Mrs. Dart, I know this will be painful for you, but did you recognise this ring when you examined it?
Yes, that's Brian's wedding ring.
Are you sure?
Well, as sure as I can be. It's just a plain, ordinary ring, but those are his initials.
And did you recognise these? No, perhaps not. No further questions.
No questions, my lord, but I hope I'll be there when learned counsel receives his Nobel Prize for tact. I now wish to call the defendant, Mr. William Clements.
Call Mr. Wilfred Lemons.
So you were on the return leg of your journey, Mr. Clements?
Yes, that's it. We'd taken someone on in Australia as crew for part of the journey, and he'd agreed to work the passage with us in return for a lift to Panama. We stopped there, let him off. We ended up staying for about 10 days to do some minor repairs.
And you then resumed your journey?
Yes, that's right. We were about 14 days out of Panama when the boat got rammed.
So what then, Mr. Clements?
Oh, well, we took to the emergency life rafts, and we lashed them together and basically just drifted.
And how did you come to be in possession of Mr. Dart's wedding ring?
We talked about dying. Some days were so unbearable you wanted to die. Brian gave me his wedding ring and said that if I made it back and he didn't, I was to give it to his wife. Give it to his wife with his love.
Difficult times, Mr. Clements.
Yes.
Now, how did you catch fish without a hook?
With the ring. I used it as a lure on the end of some cotton. When I got thirsty, I sucked on the ring to try and make the saliva come. I choked on it. It's hard to explain here to someone who doesn't know what thirst and hunger and despair really are.
Thank you, Mr. Clements.
Mr. Triggs, you're shot if you've kept your powder dry.
My lord, now, Mr. Clements, had there been any friction between you and Mr. Dart on this long voyage round the world?
My lord, it would be difficult to have a short voyage around the world.
Well, Mr. Clements?
No, not really. I mean, no more than you'd expect between two people cooped up together for that length of time.
So there were some disagreements. Violent disagreements, perhaps?
Civilised disagreements.
And now tell me, how long were your survival rations on the raft designed to last?
3 weeks or so.
And how long were you adrift?
8.
Then let me put this scenario to you, Mr. Clements. You and Mr. Dart have been adrift for some weeks, cast out in the watery wilderness, plagued with boils, with no hope of the promised land in sight. You had run out of food, and it was obvious that unless you were picked up soon, you would both die. Or, maybe not. Maybe one of you could survive. I put it to you, Mr. Clements, that driven by a terrible thirst and hunger and a fear for your own death, you crossed that thin line between civilization and chaos, and you descended like the Sodomites.
No, Mr.
That is, like the Philistines, my lord, into murder and into cannibalism. Was it not as I described, Mr. Clements?
No, it was not. I didn't eat him. It seems the only crime I've committed is to survive.
It is no crime to survive, Mr. Clements. The crime lies in how you do it. No further questions.
You may stand down, Mrs. Troy.
I wish to call Mr. Benjamin Richards, my lord.
Call Mr. Benjamin Pilchards.
Mr. Richards. Mr. Benjamin Richards.
That's me. No problem, no worries at all.
Now, Mr. Richards, I believe that, like Mr. Clements here, you are also the survivor of an ordeal by sea.
That's so. 89 days, all on my own. Just me and the sea. But no ill effects. Still all aboard upstairs.
Mr. Richards, if I may interrupt, your pockets appear to be bulging somewhat. I hope you haven't brought some kind of offensive weapon into this court, have you?
Just a few biscuits, my lord, just in case. Only I can't offer them round, see, because I might need them myself.
Oh, no, that's quite all right. You keep your biscuits. We wouldn't want to deprive you of those.
Well done, Arthur. Really impressive witness here.
Carry on, Mrs. Troy. I'm intrigued to find out why you've called this witness.
So am I. So, Mr. Richards, 89 days adrift at sea.
That's right. 89 days. Yes, 69. But all perfectly normal, as you can see. So ordinary it's boring.
And what did you live on throughout your ordeal, Mr. Richards?
Seagulls.
Seagulls?
Bit feathery. Took a bit of chewing, but not too bad after a while. That's how I survived.
I see. So Mr. Clements here could, in your experience, quite conceivably have survived for 51 days without any recourse to cannibalism.
No need, not when there's seagulls. A lot of nourishment in seagulls. I'd grab them by the legs, you see, sneaky like. That's how you do it. Hold them tight and then... That's how I survived. But all perfectly normal.
Thank you, Mr. Richards. No further questions.
Mr. Richards, you say you survived on seagulls. Do seagulls have knuckles?
No. They've got beaks, though.
Exactly. I think that says it all. No further questions.
Thank you, Mr. Richards. You may stand down. Is there something wrong, Mr. Richards?
Oh, thought I saw a seagull, sir, up there on the skyline.
Mr. Stanley, would you help Mr. Richards to his seat and be gentle with him? He's suffered enough. Mrs. Troy?
No further witnesses, my lord.
Probably just as well. Mr. Trickett, you have some closing remarks?
Yes, I do, my lord. If you could just allow me a moment. I appear to have mislaid page 70 of my notes. Here we are. My lord, members of the jury, fellow Christians, all those who quest for knowledge, all those who search for wisdom, all those who crave enlightenment, I address myself to you. In the beginning.
My lord, members of the jury, fellow creatures, all those who love brevity, all those who have homes to go to, all those who have sat here for the past 3 hours, all those with their cars in short-term car parks, I address myself to you. At the end of the day...
We find him guilty.
Guilty. And is this the verdict of you all?
It is.
Mr. Clements, you've heard the verdict. Years ago at this juncture, it would have been my duty to don a little black cap and pronounce an abominable sentence for an abominable crime. As it is, I have no alternative but to sentence you to imprisonment for life.
Oh, spirited defence, Philippa. Never mind, you can't win them all.
No, well, you should know, Gerald.
Humble in victory, magnanimous in defeat, that's what I always say.
Is it? We'll keep trying.
Yes, well, I must go, if you'll excuse me. I'm having my Bible re-leathered.
Right. Arthur? I don't know if it's sour grapes, but I get this awful feeling whenever he wins a case that there's been some dreadful miscarriage of justice.
Yes, and I get the same feeling when we win one, too.
Thank you. Better go down and see Mr. Clements.
Mrs. Troy, I would, but those little cells, they bring on my claustrophobia, so I'd best leave it to you.
Susan! He wants to appeal.
On what grounds?
He didn't like the verdict.
Well, I shouldn't be too despondent, Mrs. Troy. We all have our failures.
Talking of which, the ancient mariner didn't exactly help. The only thing he lacked was the albatross round his neck. Where did you find him?
In the sailor's home. He's writing a book, actually, called Cooking for Castaways.
I bet the seagull convene's delicious.
Yes, well, I'll be in touch.
Okay. I might cheer myself up and go to the pictures.
Anything on?
Let's see. Entertain. Arthur!
Yes?
Come here.
What?
Grounds for appeal. Missing yachtsman found.
What missing yachtsman?
Brian Dart. He's alive.
Good God. Mr. Triggs won't like this. Brian Dart alive.
It's the trouble with people, Arthur. They won't lie down until they're dead.
So where had the other survivor been all that time?
Well, the ship that picked him up wasn't what you call strictly legal.
Ah, flag of convenience, eh?
No more cargo of narcotics, I think. Anyway, they didn't drop him off as quickly as they could have done. But there he is, living proof that my client is as innocent as the sea is wet. Stephen, may I have my magnifying glass?
Have my magnifying glass, and I shall want it back. Which reminds me, I haven't had my sellotape returned yet.
It didn't last long. I didn't think you'd want the cardboard.
And I'm also still owed for those sandwiches.
No. Who owes you for sandwiches?
Well, as a matter of fact...
Harold again, no doubt.
I'm very pleased, obviously. Well, yes, of course I am. Very happy. I want to thank my counsel as well.
Very touching scenes, Mrs. Troy, very touching.
Quite emotional. 3 coffees, please.
Black, please.
Decaffeinated, no sugar, very weak, please.
Cappuccino, please. Extra chocolate and a dollop of cream.
Yes, old friends reunited.
The wrongly imprisoned set free.
Tugs at the heartstrings.
Oh, doesn't it just?
Milks the low-fat tear ducts.
They seem so pleased to see each other, didn't you think, the survivors?
They look more like a couple of conspirators with a secret to me.
Oh?
Well, look at this photograph. Didn't you notice? Brian Dart's wedding ring.
Oh, yes.
He's still wearing it after he was rescued.
But that's impossible. I mean, he gave it to Clemens and he swallowed it, didn't he?
Did he?
Well, if he didn't, whose ring was it?
Well, what if there weren't 2 men on that boat when it was shipwrecked? What if there were 3?
3?
Well, they picked up someone to crew in Australia, didn't they?
And dropped him off in Panama.
They said.
Surely don't imagine. I mean, that would mean they both tucked in.
What about the initials on the ring, BD?
Very faint. We make assumptions. BD, RD, RP, AR. Who knows? What do you think, Arthur? Where is he now? That chap they picked up in Australia. Alive and kicking somewhere, or dead and digested?
Much as we value the Prickly Peter collection, Philippa, you have been writing them for a number of years now, and we did wonder, for children of today, if he isn't getting a little bit, old-fashioned?
Old-fashioned? What do you mean? If you think Prickly Peter's old-fashioned, what about Noddy? The last time I saw anyone with a bell on his hat, he was Morris dancing.
Well, maybe a little on the one note, then. He is something of a one-man band.
No, he's not. There's lots of other characters in the stories. There's Squirmy Wormy and Phoebe Fox. Even Bertie Badger's starting to get fan mail now, and he only comes out at night.
Well, we may find it hard to maintain your current royalty level in the present state of the market, that's all.
I see. Well, with the greatest of respect, Heather, I don't think you're particularly well qualified to be any sort of judge of literature anymore.
But I'm a publisher, Philippa.
There you are, then. Shall you get the bill?
Afternoon, Mrs. Troy.
Hello, Stephen.
Lovely afternoon.
Says who?
Nice lunch?
It was all right till I ate it. Where are my briefs?
You haven't got any.
Why not?
Nobody wants you.
Yes, they do. They just think I'm too grand.
Probably.
Well, I shall go and do some other work then, and I don't want to be disturbed.
Oh, I don't think there's much chance of that, Mrs. Troy. And don't forget, you still haven't paid me for those sandwiches.
Don't worry, I won't let you forget.
What? Hello, Susan. Lovely day.
Oh, glad you think so.
Bouncy Brian the kangaroo, Smelly Sydney the slug, Ernest the earwig. No.
Penny for them, or is that too cheap?
George Stagg.
Yeah, I sneaked in. I hope you don't mind.
Not at all.
Wouldn't get many of your thoughts for a penny, eh, Mrs. Troy? Here. Expensive brain like yours.
Here, steal a seat.
You sure I'm not...
Not at all. Always time for the regulars. So, what are you doing now?
Going straight, unfortunately.
Oh, where are you doing that?
Oh, distribution, retailing, that sort of thing. I've gone all respectable, look. Checkbook, check card, cash card, credit card.
Wow, George, man with a bank account. That's a bit law-abiding. You'll be driving on the left-hand side of the road next.
Yeah. You know, when I went in to open my account, I realised it was the first time in my life I've ever been in a bank during opening hours.
Probably the first time you'd ever been in without a pair of tights on your head. How's Yvonne? She must be glad you're out after all the waiting.
Yeah. We're divorced, actually.
Oh, I am sorry.
She moved in with my probation officer. Oh, and I bumped into Mickey Royce. Remember him? You prosecuted him on the sawn-off charges, remember?
Yes, went down for 7.
Yeah. Well, he sends you his best. He says he's got your address.
Could be a good time to put my house on the market, then.
Anyway, I only came in to say hello. I shan't stop.
Well, anytime you're passing, break in.
There you are. I must go. I've got to get back to a board meeting.
Bye, George.
Oh, how's the old writing game going, by the way?
Plodding on. Prickly Peter's still with us, just about.
Very popular he was inside.
Really?
In the adult literacy classes. Well, I must go. Hope I don't see you again.
Bye, George. Stay out of trouble. How does he do it?
Come on, Stag, where you been?
I'm not late. There's another 5 minutes.
Well, go and get your brown coat on, get your forklift out, and let's get this trailer unloaded, will ya? Otherwise, we're going to have all the retailers on our backs going, eh?
Yes, Mr. Gray.
Big Benjamin the bear. No. Dodgy Donald. Dodgy Donald the donkey. Crazy Carol the camel. Ooh.
Yeah. What's it used to say now, George? That bloke on the telly? Oh, yeah. Loads of money. Loads of money. There you are, George. Like that.
Why don't you go out and sit in the kiddies' garden, Brooksy, with some crisps and lemonade? Come back when you're grown up.
Not bad for a night's work, eh, George? How much you making these days?
Yeah, in sales and distribution. The retail trade. Vroom, vroom, vroom. Yeah, we thought they'd given you a BMW, George. We didn't realise it was a Honda with a gas cylinder on the back.
It's a pub here, lads. If you want the creche and nappy changing, you ought to try Mother Care.
Pops, you can't do your safe cracking work no more, can you, George? You've lost that vital item of equipment. What's it called again? Oh, yeah, your bottle.
Listen, Sonny, anything you put down, I can match it. And more. No trouble.
All right. There's $2.50, George. There you are. Match it. You can have it. Go on, then. What are you waiting for?
I'll be right back with it. I'll be right back.
Oh, yeah, and I'll be holding my breath.
Hey, George, do you want to borrow a £5 for your bus fare? We don't mind giving you a bit of pocket money.
What do you mean? Give me my money. Right.
This is, my lord, I'm glad to say, a plain and straightforward matter that faces us today.
Oh, not another.
Certainly the simple, not the cryptic crossword, my lord, whose clues point but to one obvious solution.
Good, we'll get on with it, Mr. Triggs. Some members of the jury are quite elderly folk, and pacemaker batteries don't last forever.
What we have before us here, my lord, is truly a chronicle of turpitude, a catechism of crime, my lord, an arm-long list of lamentations, a veritable...
Ragbag of old clichés, my lord.
A restaurant menu of shame, my lord. For starters, we have one forklift truck, lightly knocked off. Next, we have one cash point wall safe, a takeaway job. And for pudding, we have the accused, the safe, and the theft of the entire contents. Yes, my lord, a very fine cheese and biscuits indeed.
Alleged cheese and biscuits, my lord.
The contents, my lord, are worth some £30,000, and having removed them, the accused then had the impudence to return the safe to the wall of the MCP Bank, whither he had stolen it and whence he was returning it.
Whence he had stolen it and whither he was returning it, my lord. Counsel, as usual, doesn't know his whithers from his whences.
Whether he does or he doesn't, Mrs. Troy, is quite irrelevant. Now, you say he returned it, Mr. Trey.
Yes, my lord, and there he would have left it and made his getaway had it not been for the sharp-eyed vigilance of the police officers who saw him and apprehended him. I should like to call my first witness, my lord, P.C. Robertson.
Call D.C. Doberman.
Mr. Stanley, have you ever thought the time may have come to make way for a younger man?
Sorry, my lord.
A younger man?
Yes, my lord. Oh, I understand. Call Princess Anne.
Now, can you relate to us, Constable, the events of March the 3rd last?
Yes, sir. I was in a patrol car with my colleague P.C. Fairley, and we'd stopped at the Crunchy Kipper fish bar, sir, for the purposes of purchasing fish and chips.
And why was that, Constable?
We were hungry, sir.
I see. So already we have logic in your every move. Continue.
We sat eating the chips with the wooden forks as supplied, whereupon my colleague diverted my attention to a vehicle approaching slowly towards us.
And can you recall exactly what was said?
Yes, sir. He said, "My, oh my, Robert, how very unusual. That would appear to be a forklift truck approaching, or are my eyes deceiving me?" I looked for myself, sir, and his eyes were not deceiving him, for I also saw a forklift truck carrying what looked like a cash point wall safe on its forks.
Do you see the driver of that truck in court today?
The accused, sir.
Thank you, Constable. No further questions.
Constable, when you saw the accused driving a forklift truck with a wall safe upon it, what were your immediate thoughts?
My initial thoughts were that he had probably stolen it.
I see. So even before you had stopped and talked to the accused, you were already prejudiced against him?
No, I would have said I had an open mind, though I did entertain my suspicions.
If you saw someone driving a car transporter with 6 cars on the back, would you assume that they had stolen those cars?
Well, no, but...
Yet simply because my client was driving a forklift truck with a safe on it, you assumed that he had stolen that safe?
Well, yes, but there were other clues.
Oh, well, what clues were these, Constable, that brought out the Sherlock Holmes in you?
The hole in the wall of the bank, for one thing. The trail of bricks up the road, for another.
Well, far be it from me to criticise the police, but I would have thought, in view of the increasing amount of serious crime, that they had better things to do than to harass innocent motorists out for a quiet evening's drive on their forklift truck.
My lord, this line of questioning does seem somewhat tangential.
I rather think what counsel intends by tangential is elliptical, my lord.
Whether it is elliptical or tangential, all seems rather peripheral to me, Mrs. Troy.
Well, that's pretty typical. So, officer, you stopped the accused, and what did you say to him?
I requested to see his documents, but he said he did not have them on him, but would present them at the station. We then exchanged some pleasantries about the weather, and I then casually asked, so as not to put him on his guard, if that was not a cash point wall safe he had there on his forklift truck. He denied this, saying no, it was his piggy bank. I took this to be a facetious answer and decided then to caution him.
And when you stopped the accused, Constable, was he driving towards or away from the bank?
He was driving towards it.
Yet if someone has really stolen something, don't they usually run away from the scene of the crime?
It is customary felonious practice, ma'am, yes.
And what reason did Mr. Stagg give for not running away?
He said he was returning the safe to the bank, that he had only borrowed it to take it home and to get his own money out of it.
And when you looked inside the safe, how much money was in there?
Nothing. It was empty.
And you searched the accused, his person and his premises?
We did, but we could find nothing there either.
Thank you, Constable. No further questions.
I wish to call Mr. David McNamara, my lord.
Call Mr. Scarlett O'Hara.
Mr. McNamara, would you tell us your occupation, please?
Yes, I'm manager of the High Street branch of the MCP Bank. I also do a little lay preaching work, sir.
And I'm a teetotal non-smoker and strict, absolutely chapel.
Admirable, Mr. McNamara, admirable. For the righteous shall be exalted, as the good book says.
And the rough ways shall be made smooth, sir.
Yet the way of the transgressor is hard, Mr. McNamara.
For the price of wisdom is above rubies.
If I may interject with a quote from the Bible myself, my lord.
Oh, yes, please, Mrs. Troy.
Jesus wept, my lord.
Amen to that, Mrs. Troy. Mr. McNamara, you're rather young to be a bank manager, aren't you? Or are bank managers like policemen just starting to look that way?
Yes, I am, sir. Our youngest ever manager, in fact. I have that honour. Though I'm sure that compared to your lordship, these are somewhat modest achievements.
Crawler.
McNamara, rather an unusual name for a Welshman.
Possibly, my lord, but we lived in Cardiff, you see.
Mr. Triggs.
Now, Mr. McNamara, had you been on duty the day the alleged robbery was committed?
Yes, I had.
And are you responsible for filling the cash point machine with cash?
Well, it's more of a junior's job, usually. But handling all that money can be a temptation, so I normally do it myself.
And how much money did you put in the machine on that Friday night?
£30,000 in 20s, 10s and 5s.
And according to the transaction roll in the machine, how much money had been removed?
None of it. The delivery mechanism must have jammed it. It was only giving out balances.
You will find copies of the transaction roll, my lord, as Exhibit A.
Oh, I have it as Exhibit C, Mr. Triggs.
I have it as Exhibit F, G and W, my lord. I haven't got it at all.
Well, can you speak to your office, Mr. Triggs, and let them have a copy of the alphabet? I believe it's available at all reputable stations.
Listed under A, my lord. A, as in amateur.
Thank you, Mrs. Troy. My apologies, my lord. It won't happen again. No further questions.
Mr. McNamara, is the accused known to you?
Yes, I remember when he came to us to open his account.
And was his a good account?
It was usually in credit, yes. Though I wouldn't say large sums of money passed through it or anything. It wasn't a prestige account. He was only a forklift truck driver.
As opposed to what, Mr. McNamara? A non-smoking, teetotal, strict, absolutely chapel bank manager, perhaps?
I just mean it was a very modest account, ma'am. But there's no harm in being humble, for the humble will be exalted, you see.
And the first shall be last, my lord, and the last shall be first.
Sounds like a case for a steward's inquiry to me, Mr. Triggs. Mrs. Troy?
My lord. So the 30,000 was in the cash point, and yet no transactions took place because the machine had jammed.
I presume that is what happened.
But if the machine can jam shut, Mr. McNamara, isn't it equally possible that it could have jammed open?
No, it's extremely unlikely. Machines, as you may have noticed, don't often go wrong in the customer's favour.
Thank you, Mr. McNamara. No further questions.
My lord, in Ezekiel
We'll have lunch now, Mr. Triggs. Now, if anyone in the jury is wishing to eat out, I can heartily recommend Sombreros, the new Mexican restaurant, where the refried beans and chili in the basket make for the most memorable lunch. Resume it too?
Court will rise.
Insufficient funds? Do you know who I work for?
So we were sending him up a bit, really. Taking a bit of a rise, like the old baking soda.
And why was that, Mr. Brooks?
Well, he was always blagging on in the past. He was always the big man, back in his safe-cracking days.
My lord!
Yes, members of the jury, disregard that last remark by the witness. Confine yourself to answering counsel's questions, please, Mr. Brooks.
Thought I was.
So what else happened, Mr. Brooks, in the bar?
Oh, we were larking around, like, doing loads of money and all that.
Loads of money, my lord. He's waving large sums of money about.
Thank you, Mr. Triggs. I'm sure as a barrister you'd know all about that.
So he starts getting a bit shirty. So I puts this money down on the table and I says to him, well, if you can match that then, George, you can have it. Only he couldn't, could he? So he goes storming off, saying he'd be back in a minute with more than you've ever dreamed of. Next thing we know, it's in the papers.
Thank you, Mr. Brooks.
Any time.
Mr. Brooks, what is your current occupation?
Me? I'm unemployed. I mean, I've looked, but there's nothing much around in my line.
Oh, what is your line?
Nothing, really.
And are you in receipt of income support, Mr. Brooks?
Yeah?
You find that easy to live on?
You must be joking.
Not really, Mr. Brooks, no. Now, you say that when you were in the pub, you upset the accused by brandishing a large wad of money.
That's right. Green as a parrot he was.
As you're unemployed and on state benefit, Mr. Brooks, where did the wad of money come from?
Eh?
Where did you get the money that you were flashing around so extravagantly?
Oh, well, I don't rightly remember.
Oh, in that case, do you remember where you're due to be a week from today?
What?
Aren't you due to be in these very courts on a charge of breaking and entering into a local off-licence?
My lord,
In light of what's already passed, I think counsel can continue.
Well, Mr. Brooks?
Yeah, maybe.
A charge to which you intend to plead guilty?
Yeah, maybe. But I didn't do it.
Oh, you didn't do it, but you're still pleading guilty.
Oh, yeah.
Well, that's very obliging, Mr. Brooks, to be willing to say whatever's required of you, whether it's true or not. And have the police not agreed to drop other, more serious charges against you in return for your giving evidence in this case here today?
My lord, I object most strenuously.
Let the witness answer the question.
Well, it's still a truth, whatever.
Thanks, Mr. Brooks. That's all.
Any time.
And that concludes the case for the Crown, my lord, most convincingly, I think.
Let's wait for the umpire's decision, shall we, Mr. Driggs?
My lord.
Your turn at the crease, Mrs. Troy.
If I may call Mr. George Stagg, my lord. So you merely wish to take what was rightfully your own money and then return the safe to its owner?
That's it.
And when you got the safe to your garage and opened it, what did you find?
Nothing. It was empty. There wasn't even a fiver in there.
Say, Mr. Stagg, what was your reaction on finding the safe empty?
I was livid, like when I took it from the wall. I was just so angry. I mean, 8 months now, I've gone to work and I've saved and I couldn't even get my own hard-earned money out. I mean, I just couldn't believe the dumb insolence of this machine. I just snapped.
You just snapped, Mr. Stagg, did you? Well, I can't say I condone it, but I think these are feelings we can all understand. Go.
When I finally opened it and found it was empty, well, it seemed to me I'd gone over the top a bit, really, and I wished I hadn't done it.
So you took the safe back?
Yeah, I was going to stick it back in the wall, then go round the bank in the morning and offer to repair the brickwork.
My client is a skilled amateur bricklayer, my lord, along the lines of Winston Churchill.
Oh, I remember him well, Mrs. Troy, for his victory salutes, which often in heavy traffic I've had occasion to emulate. As I believe you did yourself this morning when turning left at the traffic lights.
Oh, that was your lordship on the inside. I beg your lordship's pardon. I was unaware that he was allowed to drive in the bus lane. Thank you, Mr. Stagg. No further questions.
So, Mr. Stagg, the safe was empty, you would have us believe.
I'd have you believe the truth, and that's the truth.
A lot of money, £30,000, Mr. Stagg. Some might think it a sum worth going to prison for.
Then they can't put much of a value on their liberty, then.
Isn't the simple truth, Mr. Stagg, that the money was in the safe all along, that you took it and hid it, and then you returned the empty safe whence you had taken it as part of an elaborate charade, as if to say only a truly innocent man could act in such a fashion?
Just because you opened the tin doesn't mean you ate the biscuits.
Well, if you didn't take the biscuit, Mr. Stagg, your story certainly takes several packets of them. No further questions. I thought that bit about the biscuits was rather good.
It's an ingrowing thumbnail, apparently. They'd never seen one before. And then I'm due at the ear, nose and throat specialist next week. He's going to take a look at my knee.
Yes, well, I'll go home and work on my closing speech, I suppose.
Yes, if only the money would turn up. I think we'd be all right if it wasn't for the money.
Everything would be all right, Arthur, if it wasn't for the money. Hey, watch where you're going!
Stupid young idiot! See that, Mrs. Troy? Another 3 inches. We'd have been transplants.
Did you see what it was?
It was a Porsche, wasn't it?
How many dealerships are there around here?
Oh, no more than one, I wouldn't imagine.
I think I might find out where it is and go round there.
Mrs. Troy, don't you think you're a little...
Little what?
Well, a little old for that sort of thing.
What sort of thing?
Sports cars.
Not at all. You're never too old, Arthur. For anything. And can you get 2 men in raincoats round to court in the morning? Mr. Sheriff, could you tell the court your occupation?
Excuse me, I have to go soon.
Yes, I have a car dealership selling high-performance sports cars. Porsche, Lamborghini, so on. You won't get a better price anywhere.
And do you remember a sale you made last March?
Yes, I sold a second-hand Porsche on March the 10th. There was 6 months warranty with that, and a free set of rubber mats, and membership of the AA breakdown service. It's true.
March the 10th, the week after the incident with the safe, my lord. How much did you sell the car for, Mr. Sheriff?
Well, it was marked at 35,000, but I let it go for 30. I was robbing myself, but what can you do?
And how were you paid for it?
Unusually in cash.
Cash?
Yes, a lot of it, in small notes too, 20s, 10s and 5s. I remember it because it wouldn't all fit in the one carrier bag. Though it all went through the books, of course.
Did the purchaser explain why he was paying in cash?
He said he'd won it at the races.
What kind of a man was he?
Young Welsh bloke with a bow tie.
Did you see the man who bought the car in court today, Mr. Sheriff?
Yes,
Is it the accused?
No, it's that gentleman sitting there in the public gallery.
Mr. McNamara, Mr. Sheriff.
Well, it's not the name I had, my lord, but that's him.
Didn't take it. I was going to pay it back. It was only a loan. It wasn't me. I'm strict chapel.
Sit down, Mr. McNamara. Mrs. Troy, Mr. Triggs. I have in my mind we cannot continue with this charge.
So how did you know it was him, Mrs. Troy?
Providence and bad driving. But they'd have found him out sooner or later. People like that are born to be caught.
Yeah, I mean, stealing, that's one thing. But blaming someone else, that's not ethical.
What can you expect? Bank managers?
Thanks again. That's what I like about you, Mrs. Troy. You keep on persevering where others would have gone home. It's known when they're bluffing, eh? That's the secret.
Yes, it probably is. Cheers, George.
Yes.
Hello, Philippa.
Hello.
Sorry I'm late. Had one of our important authors on the phone. Have you ordered?
No, not yet.
Now, about Prickly Peter, we thought that maybe we could
I was going to ring you, actually, Heather. You see, I've had an offer from another publisher.
Oh?
Yes, he said he'd be delighted to have a major author like me on his lists. He thinks Prickly Peter is the doyen of children's hedgehogs, and he returns my phone calls.
Oh, well, actually, Philippa, I mean, let's not do anything in a hurry. In fact, I was going to offer to increase your royalty.
Oh, but I thought you wanted to decrease it.
Oh, no, that was some temp in the office. How about signing for another 3 books?
Well, I could, I suppose. I do have this new character I want to develop. He's called Dodgy Di the Dormouse, and he opens a new woodland bank.
Oh, that sounds very good, yes.
He wears a bow tie. He's strict chapel, you see.